Chapter 626. Hearing this, the Empress Dowager's pupils shrank. She frowned and said, "What inconvenience can there be in my palace? All the servants have gone out." Qin Yining stared at the Empress Dowager for a moment and suddenly smiled, as if he was relieved. He said in a low voice, "Then I'm relieved. I came to the palace today because I have a secret to tell the Empress Dowager and ask for your help." The Empress Dowager said, "If you have something to say, just say it. We're not outsiders." Qin Yining said, "Please wait a moment, Empress Dowager." As he spoke, he raised his hand to untie his lapel. The Empress Dowager was very surprised. She sat at the head of the table and stared blankly as Qin Yining undid his clothes. Finally, he untied his white undergarment. He turned sideways and took out a silk handkerchief from his pocket. He slowly walked forward and presented it to the Empress Dowager with both hands. The Empress Dowager narrowed her eyes and suspiciously took the handkerchief, which was still warm from Qin Yining's body temperature. Black ink stains could be seen on the white silk handkerchief. There were obviously words on it. The Empress Dowager unfolded the handkerchief and took a look. Her eyes suddenly widened. This is. On the handkerchief was a letter written by Li Chitian. Although there was no seal, the Empress Dowager could still recognize Li Chitian's handwriting. Li Chitian had specially prepared this for Qin Yining to keep with him in order to convince the Empress Dowager to believe in Qin Yining. "Is this true? This is really a letter written by my son. Where is my son now?" The Empress Dowager was so excited that her hands were trembling. She didn't refer to herself as Empress Dowager or Emperor Li Chitian. As a mother, she still cared about her child. Qin Yining sighed softly and said, "Empress Dowager, Your Majesty is now in the Wang Mansion. When did you save them? Why didn't they send me any news?" "Empress Dowager, Marquis Dingbei has been guarding the mountain these days. Finally, the heavens didn't let him down. Last night, Your Majesty and Wang Yi were rescued. Your Majesty has suffered a lot in the underground palace. She has lost some weight due to hunger, but her body is fine." When the Empress Dowager heard that Li Chitian was only thin due to hunger and nothing else serious, her eyes filled with tears of joy. She put her palms together and bowed to the void several times. "Amitabha. Bodhisattva, bless. Bodhisattva." Thinking about what Qin Yining had said, he felt that something was wrong. Since he's fine now, why didn't he hurry back to the palace? The court still needs him. "Empress Dowager, Your Majesty did intend to return to the palace at first. However, before we could descend the mountain, we encountered people from the warden's office of the 5 cities searching the mountain. It was said that a Taytan spy had infiltrated. Your Majesty thought it was strange at that time. He didn't trust the people of the warden's office, so we used a little trick and successfully escaped from the mountain. Before the Empress Dowager became the Empress Dowager, she was just an ordinary woman. Even though she was smarter than the average woman, because of Li Chitian's many years of military campaigns, she could be considered experienced and knowledgeable. She was also calmer than the average woman. However, when she heard Qin Yining's simple description, the Empress Dowager's face paled in fright. "What happened after we escaped? Where is my son now?" "Don't worry, Empress Dowager. Your Majesty is temporarily hiding in the prince's estate. Your Majesty ordered this woman to enter the palace and report to the Empress Dowager, asking the Empress Dowager to order the Marquis of Qingyang to lead the Tiger Army to escort him back to the palace." When Qin Yining said this, he carefully observed the Empress Dowager's expression. When the Empress Dowager heard about the Marquis of Qingyang and the Tiger Army, her eyes turned. Her expression also showed some panic. Her hands tightened on her sleeves, as if she was conflicted and afraid of something. Qin Yining said, "Empress Dowager? Empress Dowager, please issue an edict. Your Majesty now only trusts the Tiger Army. Ijia understands. In a moment, I will order the Marquis of Qingyang to handle it." The Empress Dowager said anxiously. Qin Yining raised his eyebrows and slowly nodded, "That's good. This way, Your Majesty can also be at ease. This woman will immediately return to report. Your Majesty will be able to return to the palace very soon." When he said this, Qin Yining deliberately observed the Empress Dowager's expression again. This time, the Empress Dowager seemed to feel something and met Qin Yining's eyes. Qin Yining took the opportunity to blink inquiringly. The Empress Dowager sat stiffly in her original position. Her voice was calm and dignified as she said, "You did very well this time. When your Majesty returns to the palace, Ijia will certainly heavily reward your prince's estate. Your Majesty was able to be safe in the underground palace because of Jishi's loyal protection. When Ijia returns, Ijia will hold a banquet and invite the officials and their families into the palace. It will be good for everyone to enjoy together. Many thanks for the Empress Dowager's grace." Qin Yining lowered his eyes and respectfully bowed. Then he said, "The news has been delivered. This woman still has to return to the prince's estate to report. I will take my leave." The Empress Dowager's hand tightened. In the end, she didn't say anything and only nodded. "Go. If you have free time, come and accompany Ijia. Ijia likes you when Ijia sees you." It was clearly a casual courtesy. Qin Yining only smiled when he heard it. After bowing, he left the main hall of Xian Palace with Bing Tang and Ji Yun. The Empress Dowager watched as Qin Yining slowly left with the support of the two women. Her mouth opened, but in the end, she didn't say anything because of fear. The palace doors were closed with a creak. The Empress Dowager sat upright in her original position. She heard a series of footsteps coming from behind the screen behind her, approaching from afar. Prince Li and Marquis Qingyang leisurely strolled out, one on the left and one on the right. They stood not far from the Empress Dowager and chatted in low voices without hiding anything. This king felt something was wrong last night. That group of idiots still haven't found out what was wrong with them. They actually allowed that stinking woman to put on an act and take them away. They really were one step too late. That's right. Marquis Qingyang also said, "Wang Yi, what do we do now?" "What do we do? Just wait." Prince Li stood with his hands behind his back. He squinted his eyes and smiled at the deathly pale Empress Dowager. He asked in a refined manner, "Empress Dowager, what do you think?" The Empress Dowager's face instantly turned deathly pale. Her entire body trembled violently and her lips trembled uncontrollably. Prince Li saw the Empress Dowager like this and laughed. The Empress Dowager is normally so awe-inspiring. Today, you've become so terrified. This king is truly surprised. Just now, we were behind the screen wondering when the Empress Dowager was planning on telling that little girl that we were behind the screen. Even if she didn't tell him, she should at least give him a reminder. Later, unexpectedly, the Empress Dowager didn't say anything. This really is, haha. As Prince Li spoke, he rocked back and forth with laughter. Marquis Qingyang also shook his head. It seems that in the Empress Dowager's eyes, as long as you're given enough glory, splendor, wealth, and rank, it doesn't matter who becomes the emperor. Ijia didn't. The Empress Dowager trembled like a sieve. "You can't be like this. Your Majesty has treated you well. Your Majesty has always given you a lot in the past. Prince Li, you're your Majesty's younger cousin. And Daong, you're your Majesty's uncle, Ijia's younger brother. How can you be like this?" Chapter 627. The Empress Dowager's complexion turned ashen from Prince Li's words. She trembled in fear and almost couldn't sit still. She was limp and completely relied on the support of the pillow to prevent herself from falling. She was indeed afraid of death. When Prince Li and Marquis Qingyang entered the palace today, it was as if they had suddenly become different people. They were no longer as respectful to her as before. Prince Li's actions caused the Empress Dowager to be angry, but she wasn't that sad. She could only blame herself for not recognizing people clearly and mistaking a thief with ulterior motives for a good person. However, Marquis Qingyang was her younger brother. At this critical juncture, even her younger brother wasn't willing to help. The Empress Dowager truly couldn't take it anymore. Tears streamed down her face. The Empress Dowager clutched her chest and sobbed in extreme grief. She felt wronged like a child who couldn't find her way home. How can you hit a person who's down like this? How can you treat Ijia like this? How can you treat the emperor like this? He treated you well. You're all relatives, yet you're not willing to help. Not only do you not want to help, you actually want to kill him. What good will it do you if he dies? How can you face your ancestors by doing this? Hearing the Empress Dowager's heart-wrenching sobs, Prince Li couldn't help but laugh. It seems that your Majesty has protected you too well. He actually made you think this way. Commandery Prince Li took a few steps forward and leaned closer to her. His eyes were gentle as he said, "What made you misunderstand that as long as they are relatives, you can order them around and order them to come and go as you wish? You put me in this position and said that you wanted me to be a regent. You only fancied my gentle temperament and easy to manipulate. If you could order me around at will, I wouldn't say a single word of no, right? But I'm forced to stand in this position. How many of my subordinates call me Prince Regent? Once your Majesty returns, with his temperament, could he easily let me go? Your Majesty wouldn't even let go of Pang Zhishi, who has made great contributions on the battlefield. That's someone who can't possibly shake his throne. As someone who's been discussed as Prince Regent, what good end could I possibly have? Therefore, everything I'm doing right now is actually the same as you. It's all for the sake of self-preservation. You think too much. Your Majesty is not that kind of person. I won't hurt you." The Empress Dowager's face was full of tears. She anxiously tugged at Prince Li's sleeve, appeasing and begging, "Your Majesty is not that kind of person. He and Pang Zhishi are not biological brothers, but you are different. You are his biological cousin. How is it different?" In order to stabilize his position, he would even capture and kill anyone, let alone his own cousin. Prince Li's smile became even more gentle, like a demon luring people into depravity. His voice was full of a soothing tone. "Don't worry, Empress Dowager. Whatever I do, it's only against your Majesty and to save my own life. It has nothing to do with you, a woman in the palace. You only need to worry about passing your days peacefully in this palace. This king and the Marquis of Qingyang will respect you and be filial to you as before. Your life will not change in the slightest. Isn't that good?" The Empress Dowager looked at Prince Li's face. At this time, she already realized that perhaps anything she said would be useless. In the end, he was not flesh that fell from her body and was not related to her by blood. Not only could she not count on him, it was already good enough that Prince Li did not directly take his life. The Empress Dowager then looked towards the Marquis of Qingyang. "Daong, what about you? Do you also want to treat me like this? I am your biological sister. I've always treated you well and did my best for our Zhu family. Do you also want to be like this and not let your nephew off?" The Marquis of Qingyang helplessly spread out his hands and said with a mischievous smile, "Of course what sister says is reasonable, but for better or for worse, you should think for me. You know best what kind of personality your own son has. If you allow him to return and continue sitting in this position, not to mention anything else, he will first accuse me of stealing military power from the Tiger Army. At that time, where will I go to reason? He won't. When the Empress Dowager heard that this was what the Marquis of Qingyang was afraid of, she hastily rushed forward and grabbed his hand. "He won't harm you. You are his biological uncle. I can guarantee that he definitely won't disobey my wishes. I will protect you. That's enough, sister. Don't deceive yourself and others." The Marquis of Qingyang supported the Empress Dowager back to her seat and looked down at her from above. Just like Prince Li said, he can't even tolerate Pang Zhishi, who fought alongside him, let alone me. I will tell the Emperor that it was I who gave you military power from the Tiger Army. I don't blame you. The Empress Dowager anxiously raised her head. Her entire face was red and the veins on her forehead were bulging. The Marquis of Qingyang said, "Can he believe it? Even if he believes it, it's not like he can't casually accuse me of a crime. When the time comes, he will pull my head off with a glare. What should I do? When the time comes, will sister die with me or die in my place?" The Empress Dowager slumped back in her seat. The two people in front of her had already made up their minds. She felt that it was useless to say anything. She was a useless mother. She didn't have the ability and couldn't rush out to save her son. Right now, she could only place her hopes on Pang Xiao and Ji Zheyu. Since they were able to secretly send someone to the prince's estate without the knowledge of the warden's office, they should also do their best to protect your Majesty's life, right? As the Empress Dowager thought this, she suddenly thought of herself. Prince Li and the Marquis of Qingyang clearly already had disloyal intentions and wanted to usurp power. She knew such a big secret. Wouldn't she be silenced in the blink of an eye? The Empress Dowager's eyes widened in fright. Her entire body trembled violently again. She wanted to escape in fright, but the two people in front of her wouldn't let her escape. She was so scared that her face turned pale and her body trembled like a leaf about to fall from a tree branch in a gale. Seeing the Empress Dowager's expression suddenly change, the Marquis of Qingyang already understood what she was thinking. He helplessly said, "Sister, you don't need to be too scared. No matter what, we are still a family. As long as you are obedient and don't speak carelessly, your younger brother isn't a tiger or a wolf. How could I not care about your life? Besides, even if Prince Li ascends the throne in the future, Prince Li's birth mother is no longer here. You can still continue to be the Empress Dowager." The Empress Dowager's body trembled even more violently. Tears continuously flowed out as she looked at Prince Li in fright. Prince Li smiled and patted the Empress Dowager's shoulder, saying, "The Empress Dowager really doesn't need to be afraid. This king isn't a man-eating demon. In the future, when he ascends the throne, this king will also be filial to you." Although he said this, Prince Li's attitude was too frivolous. The Empress Dowager was so shocked that she didn't know what to do. Prince Li and the Marquis of Qingyang each pulled out a chair and sat across from the Empress Dowager. They chatted intimately with her. Although the two chatted cheerfully and often laughed, the Empress Dowager sat in her original position and cried in fright. The more the two laughed, the fiercer her tears fell. Chapter 628. What a good Prince Zhongshuan consort, you actually dared to enter the palace. Li Helan stopped and arrogantly raised her chin as she looked at Qin Yining with disdain. Aside from eating and eating, she had been waiting to block her the entire time. Knowing that Qin Yining wanted to enter the palace to see the Empress Dowager and Empress, Li Helan didn't dare cause trouble in the Empress Dowager's palace. She wanted to wait on the path outside the Empress Dowager's palace. At that time, even if she kicked this slut a few times, no one would care. Who knew that after waiting for a long time at the Empress Dowager's palace, she still didn't see her. There was even a small eunuch that came to pass a message saying, "Prince Zhongshuan consort isn't feeling well and is in a hurry to leave the palace." Not feeling well? Why would she enter the palace if she wasn't feeling well? They weren't the ones who invited her. She sent an invitation to enter the palace, but after seeing the Empress Dowager and not seeing her imperial sister-in-law, she wanted to leave. What kind of rule was this? Could it be that she was just a small official's wife, so how could she look down on the mother of the country? Wasn't she just marrying Pang Zhishi? What was there to be proud of? Li Helan's disgust towards Qin Yining increased by another level. She immediately called her servants and rushed over to block Qin Yining. Qin Yining narrowed her eyes as she looked at Li Helan. She suppressed the anxiety and irritation in her heart and bowed, "Greetings to your highness the eldest princess." This official's wife doesn't understand what the eldest princess means. What do you mean you don't understand? Tell me, why didn't you kneel down to greet this princess? Could it be that you're looking at my imperial brother's life and death and are hoping for the country to change? Li Helan was clearly making things difficult for her, causing Bing Tang and Ji Yun's expressions to instantly change. Qin Yining had been pregnant with the twins for 8 months and her belly was already comparable to a normal pregnant woman about to give birth. Even though she had been treated well by Bing Tang, she still couldn't stand kneeling down. The eldest princess was also a woman. How could she make things difficult for a pregnant woman? Qin Yining sighed in her heart. Li Helan was so unruly. She thought that she would restrain herself after getting married, but she didn't expect her to become even worse. Qin Yining. Thinking about Li Helan's actions and Ji Ziyu, Qin Yining felt that Ji Ziyu wasn't worth it. Qin to feel for Ji Ziyu. On top of that, Li Helan's evil intentions towards Pang Xiao were obvious to anyone with a discerning eye. Therefore, her disgust towards Li Helan increased tenfold. Qin Yining couldn't help showing her emotions on her face. She sneered and said, "Princess Royal, you must be joking." The Empress Dowager is kind and considerate of my inconvenience, so I don't have to salute in the palace. Does to princesses princess. Is to princess. Of you. When did this one say that? Imperial mother is benevolent, but you shouldn't be so shameless. Li Helan had her hands on her hips and pointed at Qin Yining. She looked like she was going to fight with Qin Yining today. She had long disliked Qin Yining. To be able to seduce a heroic figure like Pang Xiao to only fall in love with her, she really had great skills. She had such an outstanding man and she didn't know how to cherish her fortune. She even dared to come out and show off. She even dared to go to the Taten and come back with a big belly. Looking at her belly, it should be something that only a woman about to give birth would have, right? Who would believe that they were twins? It was possible that Pang Xiao had said this to cover up her embarrassment. She would just casually bring a child to her side and say that Qin Yining gave birth to two. It wasn't impossible for someone like Pang Xiao to do it. The more Li Helan thought about it, the more she felt it was possible. She only treated Qin Yining as a disaster that would bring disaster to the country. Not only did he kill the female Khan of the Taten and lead the war in, he even had Pang Xiao, the god of war, Wang Yi, completely under his control. Li Helan did not hide the emotions in her heart. Her eyes were filled with hatred as if she wanted to skin Qin Yining alive. When Ji Yun saw this, she moved closer to Qin Yining. If Li Helan dared to order the people around her to move, she would not be polite to them. She had long disliked Li Helan. With Wang Yi supporting her, she was not afraid of anything. Eldest princess. Qin Yining said in a deep voice, please pay attention to your words and actions. You are your Majesty's younger sister and the Empress Dowager's daughter. If you act so recklessly, aren't you afraid of being laughed at by others? It doesn't matter if you are laughed at, but if you affect your Majesty's and the Empress Dowager's reputation, wouldn't that be bad? I advise the eldest princess to read more and write more when she's free. People say that people learn from books and that writing can temper one's state of mind. You can give it a try. Li Helan almost rolled her eyes in anger. You actually dare to laugh at this princess for being uncultured. Only you have talent, only you read more books. No one else can compare to you. Who do you think you are? If you really have the ability, you can go to the north and sleep with the Taten people and tell them not to attack the city. That is your ability. Why are you pretending to be a scholarly, noble, chaste, and virtuous woman? After what you did in the Taten, do you think we are all blind fools? Li Helan grew up in the countryside and had seen many of these village women bicker. When she was angry and anxious, she couldn't control her emotions and couldn't help but speak without thinking. Bing Tang angrily glared and opened her mouth to refute, but Qin Yining pulled her back in time. The difference in status was too great. If Bing Tang opened her mouth, she would be waiting for Li Helan to bully her. Qin Yining said, eldest princess really has a good upbringing. In this imperial palace, you can say anything dirty and smelly. Could it be that no one teaches the eldest princess what manners are? Some things are just rumors. Even the shrews on the streets who are good at cursing people don't believe them, but the eldest princess talks about it. Really? Shaking her head, as if she couldn't find a word to describe the eldest princess's vulgarity, Qin Yining said, this subject can't think of anything in common with the eldest princess, so I will take my leave. Eldest princess, please go ahead. She curtsied. Qin Yining then took the two maidservants and walked outside. She still had to go back and discuss with Pang Xiao, so she didn't have the mood or time to argue with Li Helan. Qin Yining's words were filled with disdain and her expression was filled with disdain. Li Helan had always been jealous of Qin Yining. Seeing that she was about to give birth and still looked so beautiful, the jealousy in her heart surged. Thinking of how Ji Zheyu had personally sent her back to the palace yesterday and even changed her clothes in the palace, she felt even angrier when she wanted to see Ji Zheyu. You're just a little hussy who specializes in seducing people. The eldest princess chased after Qin Yining. First you seduced brother Xiao and now you seduced this one's husband. You're shameless. Qin Yining was stunned by her unreasonable actions. This was the imperial palace and Li Helan dared to act like this. Was she not afraid of breaking the rules? Ji Yun quickly moved in front of Qin Yining and blocked Li Helan's hand. Ji Yun was angry, but she knew her limits. She knew that the princess was precious and if she was hurt, it would bring disaster to her master. No matter how angry she was, she did not make a move against Li Helan. She just lowered her head and stood there, using her body to block the two personalities. Li Helan was already filled with anger from not being able to pull Qin Yining. Seeing this blind servant standing in front of her like a block of wood, she couldn't take it anymore. She gritted her teeth and wanted to go around them. But if she went to the left, Ji Yun would go to the left. If she went to the right, Ji Yun would go to the right. She was completely blocked. Li Helan angrily raised her hand to slap her. Ji Yun received this slap, but she did not move at all. Qin Yining saw that Ji Yun was hit and became even more angry. At this critical moment, she was anxious to go back and discuss countermeasures with Pang Xiao, but Li Helan was causing trouble out of nothing. Your Highness the eldest princess, have you caused enough trouble? Qin Yining pulled Ji Yun behind her. She placed her bulging stomach in the middle and forced Li Helan back several steps. Li Helan stood still and realized that she had shown weakness by backing up in front of Qin Yining. Her face turned green and she pointed at Qin Yining's nose. You. Shut up. Qin Yining coldly said, the eldest princess is a noble descendant. In such troubled times, your Majesty's situation is still unknown, but you are in a hurry to bully an outsider. Aren't you afraid that it will spread and make the court officials bitterly disappointed? You act so disorderly, you are really discrediting the Empress Dowager. You, impudent. Li Helan's expression changed greatly. You dare to insult the Empress Dowager. When has this subject insulted the Empress Dowager? This subject is wronged on behalf of the Empress Dowager. The eldest princess is unfilial and implicates the Empress Dowager. She has wronged the Empress Dowager for no reason. Even the servants can't stand it. You should know your place. If you cause a ruckus, look at the current situation in the court and see if it is good for the imperial family. A woman's virtue was taught by her mother. Li Helan did not follow the rules and was completely connived by the Empress Dowager. Li Helan had already caused people to talk behind her back because she kept a gigolo. Now, she was being reprimanded by Qin Yining. Not to mention others, she already felt that she had lost face. Seeing Li Helan's face turn red and she looked like she was about to cry, Qin Yining put up a finger and said, the eldest princess shouldn't cause a ruckus, lest you lose face. After saying this, he called Ji Yun and Bing Tang and turned to leave. Li Helan looked as if she had been wronged. She stood in the same place and cried. She chased after Qin Yining and scolded in a choked voice, you bitch, seducing brother Xiao and then seducing the prince consort. You are so restless, you deserve to be a widow. Qin Yining was so angry that he stopped in his tracks. He turned around and glared at her. His cold eyes were as frightening as a beast whose cubs had been stolen. Although Pang Xiao had safely come out of the underground palace, the road ahead would be difficult. There would often be battles on the battlefield, and the days of fear would be long. Qin Yining hated this the most. Li Helan's words really touched her bottom line. Wang Yi and your Majesty are trapped in the underground palace. If you curse me to be a widow, aren't you cursing your Majesty? Li Helan was immediately speechless. She was afraid that Qin Yining would pass these words to the Empress Dowager's ears, so she cried out in grievance. Qin Yining, Bing Tang, and Ji Yun moved forward again. The palace servants who had been standing on both sides of the palace road with their heads down and pretending to be quails couldn't help but look at Qin Yining with admiration. She was indeed the Prince Zhongxian's woman. She could make the domineering eldest princess obedient and only knew how to stand there and cry. She was simply valiant. Chapter 629. When the Empress heard the news, she was holding her waist and sitting on the soft chair in a daze with a frown. Is that so? Is she really capable of doing something so stupid? Your Majesty, many people saw it with their own eyes. It was on the long street outside the palace. Princess Royal walked out of your place and went directly to Prince Zhongxian's consort. The palace servant who served the Empress all year round knew the Empress's thoughts best. She observed the Empress's expression and said flatteringly, "Princess Royal is really too much. How can she quarrel with an outsider's wife on the long street?" It is said that Princess Royal even wanted to use force on Prince Zhongxian's consort. Princess Royal is 8 months pregnant. It is said that she didn't come to see your majesty because she didn't feel well after seeing the Empress Dowager. Princess Royal actually dared to touch Princess Royal. It is really. The palace servant shook his head. As a palace servant, it was not good to talk too much. However, the Empress had been angered by the eldest princess many times over the years. Seeing the eldest princess lose face now, these loyal subordinates felt their hatred had been vented. Hearing this, the Empress's dull face turned into a mocking one. She became lively. There should be someone who can teach her a lesson. The imperial court is in such a mess now. It is not the turn of the harem to make trouble. The Qin clan is pregnant. Not to mention her, even the Empress Dowager, and I don't dare to let anything happen to her. She dared to provoke the Qin clan. She really doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. The Empress was dissatisfied and resentful. Her sister-in-law had never been easy to deal with. It was fine if she was spoiled and willful. It could be understood as the innocence of a girl. But she had a male companion after getting married. She could do such a thing that damaged women's virtue and disgraced the imperial family. The Empress Dowager didn't even care about it. Instead, she supported Li Hilan. "Your Majesty had such a big thing this time." The Empress Dowager came up to fight for power. First, she made a regent. Then, she snatched the position of the commander-in-chief of the Tiger Army from her son-in-law and gave it to her younger brother. The Empress was weak and her mother's family was not strong. They could only watch helplessly as the Empress Dowager scurried up and down. She was now 5 months pregnant and worried about your Majesty. However, she was a woman in the palace and had no power in her hands. She had no other choice but to sit in the palace and count the days. Now that there was a Li Hilan who could give the Empress Dowager some trouble, the Empress felt that her body and mind were much better. Letting out a long breath, the Empress stood up from the soft couch. She held her waist and slowly walked to the caltrop window. She reached out and pushed the window sash open a crack. The cold wind of late autumn blew against his face, and a trace of coldness drilled into his collar, causing goosebumps to rise on his neck. However, when he took a deep breath, he felt refreshed. "Niang Niang, be careful. You'll get a headache from the cold wind." The servant took a cloud shawl and draped it over the Empress' shoulders. The Empress shook her head and looked at the setting sun that was gradually disappearing behind the mountains. Her eyes were actually a little wet. "Your Majesty, are you all right? If you were still in the palace, how could you let these rascals jump up and down and disturb the palace?" These people only cared about the small benefits in front of them and did not care about the safety of the country. The north had the Taitan, the south had the Yang. They did not care at all. Including the Empress Dowager, they were like poor relatives from the countryside, anxiously staring at the benefits in front of them. If your Majesty did not come back, she really did not know how long she could hold on. If someone really did usurp power, she was afraid that the first to suffer would be her and the child in her womb. At that time, the Empress Dowager would probably completely ignore her and only care about the benefits in front of her. The Empress thought of this and could not help but cry. Thinking of this, she would rather not be the Empress. It was better to be a woman of a normal family and have a stable life. When Qin Yining returned to the Wang Fu, he saw that Huzi, who had been on the mountain, had returned. He personally received Qin Yining's carriage and went straight to the inner residence. He removed the threshold of Saiqing Garden and drove the carriage in. Qin Yining got out of the carriage and asked, "How is the situation on the mountain?" Huzi said, "Wang Fei, don't worry. The excavation on the mountain is still continuing. Wang Yi has already made arrangements. The people who should withdraw have already withdrawn." Qin Yining smiled and nodded, saying, "That's good. Where is Wang Yi now?" "Wang Yi went to send your Majesty and Marquis Dingbei off." Just as Huzi's voice fell, a slight sound came from the top of the wall on the right. Then there was the sound of light footsteps like a leopard cat landing on the ground. Pang Xiao, who was dressed in dark blue, ordinary home clothes, quickly walked over. "You're back. How is your body? Are you feeling unwell?" "I'm very good. It's just that Ji-yoon was wronged because she followed me and was slapped by Enyang Princess Royal." Chin Ening held Ji-yoon's hand and said, "When we left the palace, we met Enyang Princess Royal. I don't know what went wrong with her, but she pointed at me and scolded me. Later on, she even tried to push me. Ji-yoon tried to stop her, but she didn't dare to directly make a move against Princess Royal. Instead, she was slapped by Princess Royal." Pang Xiao looked at Ji-yoon's left cheek. It was already red. He couldn't help but sigh. "Good girl, it's all thanks to you. You've wronged yourself this time." Ji-yoon was personally groomed by Pang Xiao. She had always been in awe of Pang Xiao. After following Chin Ening, although they suffered a lot together, Chin Ening treated her very well. She also sincerely treated Chin Ening as a master that she could entrust her life to. She didn't feel anything when she was slapped because of Chin Ening. But Chin Ening took this matter to heart. Pang Xiao even gently comforted her. It really warmed her heart. Ji-yoon repeatedly shook her head. "This is this servant's duty." Chin Ening said, "Let Bing Tang help you apply medicine first." The two servant girls knew that Chin Ening and Pang Xiao had something to talk about, so they retreated. Chin Ening and Pang Xiao returned to the room. After sitting down on the warm couch by the window, Chin Ening leaned against the pillow behind him and said, "I went to see Iron Palace and found something. I feel that the Empress Dowager seems to have been put under house arrest." Pang Xiao raised an eyebrow and said with a nod, "This is also expected. Since Prince Li wants the throne, as long as he isn't too stupid, he should go back and monitor the Empress Dowager and Empress." Chin Ening said, "Where is your Majesty right now? Thanks to those amazing people from the Qingtian Alliance, they led our people to dig a tunnel at the fastest speed. Your Majesty and the people in our Fu are gradually moving out. That's good." Chin Ening sighed in relief and said, "You don't know, but I once experienced a calamity in my Fu. Because of this, I lost my family and friends. That kind of scene, just once is enough to become a nightmare that I can't forget for the rest of my life. I really don't want to experience it again." Pang Xiao moved closer, hugged Chin Ening, and gave her a peck on the cheek. He couldn't help but rub his face against hers when he felt her soft and cool touch. "Don't worry. With me here, I definitely won't let that kind of thing happen to the family." Pang Xiao had been trapped for 20 days and had lost a lot of weight. If he didn't have a good body, practiced martial arts, and had Bing Tang medicine, he probably would have been lying down by now. But when their faces were close, Chin Ening could still feel his sunken cheeks. Chin Ening said with heartache, "I will always be with you." The room was silent. The warm golden rays of the setting sun shone in through the screen window, covering all the furniture in the room with a layer of golden curtains. It was so quiet and warm. In his arms was the woman he wanted to protect and cherish the most in his life. He really wanted time to stop at this moment. But knowing that a storm was coming, how could he relax and enjoy this peace? Since it is as we guessed, Prince Li's people have already taken control of the Empress Dowager, then the best time for them to act is tonight. Looking at the room that he had lived in for a while, Chin Ening sighed. Pang Xiao kissed her forehead. "What's wrong? Can't bear to leave?" "Just a little bit." Chin Ening closed his eyes and said tiredly, "It wasn't easy to have a home, but it's going to turn into a scorched earth again. Maybe I'm just unlucky. I've always been homeless. It was like this when I was in Dian, and it's still like this now. Silly." Pang Xiao's heart ached. He hugged her and shook her gently. "As long as we are fine, we will have a stable home in the future. No one will come to disturb us. This mansion wasn't originally my home. Your Majesty gave it to me for the sake of a good reputation. We have already packed up and taken away all our valuables. All that's left in the house are the belongings that Your Majesty gave me. There's nothing to feel bad about." Chin Ening smiled and said, "If Commandery Prince Li wants to destroy the evidence, the most convenient way is to kill and burn them all. I'm really distressed to see such a good house being ruined like this. In the future, we will have a more stable home. Believe me, okay?" Pang Xiao's voice was gentle and low, making Qin Yining feel extremely at ease. Maybe she was really so emotional because she was pregnant. If the old didn't go, the new wouldn't come. As long as they were still alive, money and other things were just worldly possessions. Moreover, they had already made preparations. The gold, silver, and valuables had already been transferred quickly. Have you contacted Master Zhong? Qin Yining asked. Pang Xiao nodded and said, Master Zhong is a reliable person. As soon as I told him, he didn't even ask. He made a list of 3 houses that he had recently purchased for you. One of the fields is outside the city. It's inconvenient for us to leave the city, so we won't choose it for the time being. The other house is in Autumn Apple Square. This house is good in every way, but it's a bit small. It's not convenient for 2 families to live together. So I chose the house next to Shishahai. It's more spacious there. Our Lan has already instructed his people to help us move quietly. That's good. It's just that the city is now under martial law. Prince Li's people are especially strict with the inspection. Won't they find out? Don't worry. Prince Li should be panicking now. If he wants to take action, he will definitely take down your majesty before tonight. As for the rest, it's most likely that they are hiding under the light. We can take advantage of the loopholes to get there. It's not a big deal. Qin Yining felt relieved. He smiled and sighed. It's better that you are at home. I have a backbone for everything. I don't have to be afraid of anything. Chapter 630. Qin Yining relaxed and closed her eyes. She peacefully leaned on Pang Xiao's shoulder and thought about the future. Although she was hesitant and worried, because she was with Pang Xiao, she could completely relax. Qin Yining was never someone who was afraid of death. Compared to death, she was more afraid of her family and loved ones being separated by life and death. As long as Pang Xiao was by her side, at least she did not have to worry about him. Compared to this, nothing else was important. Qin Yining was exhausted from the entire day. When she returned to Pang Xiao's side, she was like a tired swallow returning to its nest. After relaxing, she felt a bit drowsy. However, she did not forget to tell Pang Xiao about the suspicious points she had just discovered. There is one more thing. Yuan. Pang Xiao's voice was low and hoarse, but it was filled with gentleness and patience. Qin Yining blinked and forcefully said, outside our palace, there must be many spies. When the eldest princess quarreled with me earlier, she said that I seduced North Marquis Dingbei. Pang Xiao frowned when he heard this. He sneered and said, don't mind her. I'm afraid that she is about to go crazy. She doesn't know how to behave herself and randomly bites anyone she sees. I trust your character and I understand Jilan even better. You are not that kind of person. Qin Yining smiled and said, I know that you trust me. On the way back, I kept thinking that there is no smoke without fire. Since the eldest princess said this, there must be a reason. There must be something that caused her to misunderstand. In the past 20 days, I have indeed spent half of my time on the mountain, watching North Marquis Dingbei and the others dig and rescue. At that time, I did not see the eldest princess angrily charge up the mountain to reason with me. With the eldest princess's personality, if she misunderstood, she could even cause trouble for me in the palace. It is not impossible for her to come up the mountain. Pang Xiao nodded. You are right. So I was thinking that when we came back last night, we were seen by the eldest princess's spies. Oh. Pang Xiao thought about it and vaguely understood. You are saying that Jilan was outside driving the carriage and sent you back. Yes, North Marquis Dingbei even bathed and had dinner before leaving. Pang Xiao completely understood. Li Helan's spies must have seen this. Such a small matter could make Li Helan stir up such a huge commotion. It really made people speechless. Think about it, if the eldest princess's spies saw this, would it be possible that Prince Li's spies saw this as well? Is that why the empress is being controlled? Pang Yining's and Iz's, ISS Pang Xiao nodded. SS. I of those peoples, Is. Yi Pang Yi S. Wang Yi. Pang Xiao gently patted Qin Yining's shoulder and got up to answer the door. Huzi said in a low voice, This group of spies has also been completely dealt with. The total number of spies should be enough. Okay, I understand. Tell Mr. Liao to inform the brothers of the Qingtian alliance to prepare. Yes. Huzi bowed and retreated. Qin Yining vaguely understood what they meant by the number of spies. When the time came, if Prince Li attacked with fire, there had to be a way to deceive them. The number of spies had to be enough. If these spies were not arranged by Prince Li, then they were arranged by Marquis Qingyang. Among them were the eldest princess's people, but there was no lack of others. The prince's estate was under the surveillance of these flies every day. If they were not careful, it was very likely that even the color of their underwear would be seen by them. The most important thing was that these spies could become assassins at any time, taking their lives while they were unprepared. Therefore, although Qin Yining felt uncomfortable about killing people, he would not stop Pang Xiao from doing what needed to be done. The result of soft-heartedness was very likely to harm one's own people. Prince Li and Marquis Qingyang stayed together in the Empress Dowager's palace for dinner. Li Helan accompanied them on the side, attentively pouring wine and dishes for the Empress Dowager, Prince Li, and Marquis Qingyang. Imperial Mother, don't be sad. Imperial Brother will be safe and sound. Isn't Prince Consort continuing to dig? Besides, Prince Li has handled the matters of the imperial court in an orderly manner. Although the war in the north is tense, Marquis Qingyang will soon be able to set out to reinforce Qianmen Pass. Although the current situation is tense, it's not that serious. There's still hope. Imperial Mother, why should you cry over this? You should be strong. We still need to rely on you. Li Helan and Qin Yining had a big quarrel and returned to Xi'an Palace to complain to the Empress Dowager. Who would have thought that while Prince Li and Marquis Qingyang were both present, the Empress Dowager was sitting at the head of the table, trembling and crying. Li Helan concluded that Qin Yining must have carelessly said something sad to the Empress Dowager, causing her to be sad. In front of Prince Li and Marquis Qingyang, Li Helan exaggerated Qin Yining's domineering, arrogant, and unruly behavior. This time, the Empress Dowager did not scold her. She only said that if she did not like her in the future, then they would not interact. Her tone sounded a bit absent-minded. It was clear that she was greatly angered by Qin Yining. Fortunately, Prince Li and Marquis Qingyang both knew how to be filial to the Empress Dowager. They especially stayed for dinner and could accompany the Empress Dowager to relieve her boredom. Otherwise, who knows how long the Empress Dowager would be sad and depressed. Of the 4 people present, only Li Helan didn't know anything. He only thought that they were relatives of the same family and that they were all on the same side. There was nothing to avoid. The Empress Dowager's heart was about to collapse. She didn't know how many times she gave Li Helan signals, but it was like giving signals to a blind person. Li Helan actually didn't understand at all. One time, he even directly asked her, "Imperial Mother, are your eyes hurting from crying?" She raised such a stupid, arrogant, and willful daughter who could not be counted on at a critical moment. If it weren't for Prince Li and Marquis Qingyang watching coldly from the side, the Empress Dowager really wanted to violently scold Li Helan to vent her anger. Prince Li was currently in an extremely good mood. He was like an astute old cat who managed to catch a mouse but didn't immediately bite it to death. Instead, he lazily lay on the ground and used his hidden claws to press down on the mouse's tail. He watched as the mouse tried to escape but couldn't, but still held on to hope and struggled. On what basis could Li Qitian conquer the world and become the emperor? The world was about to be his. In the days to come, he would be the emperor. The great Zhou dynasty would be his, and everyone would have to listen to him. He would have supreme power, and he would be able to kill and seize at will. Prince Li thought like this. Seeing Li Helan's stupid fawning appearance was even more interesting. Marquis Qingyang also felt that his niece was very stupid. He simply lowered his head and ate his wine and food. What the eye doesn't see, the heart doesn't grieve over. After the meal, Prince Li stood up and cupped his hands. "Empress Dowager, there are still court matters to take care of outside. I will take my leave first." Seeing this, Marquis Qingyang also stood up and bowed. "Many thanks for the Empress Dowager's banquet. Younger brother will also take his leave." The Empress Dowager's heart beat wildly and her frightened eyes widened. They were going to leave. Were they planning to kill the Emperor? So what they would do next? Would they immediately kill her to silence her? Would Lana also be? Many ways of dying flashed through the Empress Dowager's mind. Not a single one of them wasn't miserable. Li Helan saw that the Empress Dowager's face had lost all color, as if she had encountered a frightening event that caused the sky to collapse. He couldn't help but ask in confusion, "Imperial Mother, what's wrong?" Marquis Qingyang smiled and said, "Lan Uncle is leaving the palace. Won't you send Uncle off?" Li Helan smiled and said, "That's fine." Turning around, Li Helan bowed towards the Empress Dowager, "Imperial Mother, daughter will return in a moment." "Don't." The Empress Dowager reached out, wanting to grab Li Helan. Right now, she didn't trust Prince Li, and she didn't trust her own younger brother even more. She was already about to helplessly watch these people gang up to kill her son, but she was helpless. If she also lost her daughter's life, how would she live the rest of her life? But when he reached out his hand and saw Commandery Prince Li's smiling eyes, he paused. Even his words were stuck in his throat. The Empress Dowager hesitated and was afraid. Li Helan, unaware, followed Marquis Qingyang out. Prince Li turned around and glanced at the Empress Dowager with a smile that wasn't a smile. His expression was like he had seen the most exciting part of a play, with interest and disdain. When Prince Li exited the hall, he heard Marquis Qingyang say, "I haven't visited your residence in a long time. Do you mind if younger uncle strolls around your residence?" In the past, Li Helan and his younger uncle had a very good relationship. Although Li Helan was now somewhat estranged from Marquis Qingyang because of the conflict of interests, he didn't find it novel at all when he heard this and immediately agreed. Prince Li raised an eyebrow. He didn't stop Marquis Qingyang, minding his own business as he went to the imperial study. At this time, it was already the time when the sky was filled with the glow of the sunset. Before the sunset, the most perfect and dazzling light was left in the world for people to linger on. The light of the sunset shone through the window, illuminating Prince Li's face as he sat behind the imperial table. After a moment, Prince Li beckoned to the chamberlain next to him. That chamberlain was tall and strong. If it weren't for the lack of beard on his chin, it would be difficult to determine that this person was a chamberlain. Act according to the original plan. Yes. The chamberlain immediately withdrew. He quickly went to instruct Prince Li on the matters arranged. The Empress Dowager was silently wiping her tears when Xi'an Palace was surrounded by people. The Empress Dowager anxiously asked, "What's wrong?" Replying to the Empress Dowager, "It is said that Taytan assassins have infiltrated the palace. Prince Li ordered us to protect the Empress Dowager's safety." The Empress Dowager's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't help but mutter, "They're here, they're finally here." At this time, the Empress Dowager had just finished eating dinner. Hearing a burst of noisy footsteps outside the palace gates, she couldn't help but find it strange. Not long after, Commandery Prince Li barged in with his men without any prior notice. "Imperial sister-in-law?" Prince Li's voice dragged out each word. The Empress held her stomach and calmly said, "I don't know Prince Li. You came uninvited. What business do you have with me?" Prince Li chuckled. He casually found a chair and sat down, saying, "There is something I don't understand and would like to ask Imperial sister-in-law." Chapter 631. Prince Li said with a smile, "I heard that when a pregnant woman is pregnant, the fetus and the mother will compete for nutrients. So I want to know, if the mother is in a desperate situation, will the limited nutrients be absorbed by the mother or stolen by the fetus?" The Empress' pupils shrank when she heard this. She angrily glared at Prince Li. Her mind was spinning and many curses were on the tip of her tongue, but the Empress desperately held them back. She couldn't be impulsive. What if she angered this evil thief and caused him to harm the child in her womb on the spot? She didn't have any hope for herself, but she had to do her best for the child. As long as Prince Li didn't immediately kill her, then she and the child still had hope. Commandery Prince Li enjoyed the Empress's changing expression with interest. Seeing that she didn't beg for mercy in the end, nor did she fly into a rage, but instead silently lowered her eyes. Prince Li couldn't help but sigh. TSK, I didn't think Imperial sister-in-law had this kind of personality. I didn't see through you in these years. But to be worthy of being Li Qitian's empress, your personality naturally isn't bad. He waved his hand and there was a rush of footsteps behind him. Jun Wang. Ian, do it. Do it cleanly. Don't alarm anyone. Yes. The confidant immediately obeyed and led a group of people to bring all the palace servants of the empress who had been forced to kneel on the ground and gagged, as well as the palace servants who had seen Prince Li come to the empress palace. They were all brought to a corner and executed with their mouths covered. Soon, a well was filled. As for the empress, all the food and water in the hall were taken out and thrown out. The empress was pushed into the hall and then all the doors and windows were firmly sealed. Prince Li stood outside the door with his hands behind his back. The sky was completely dark and the stars illuminated the scene in front of him. His confidants and guards were neatly nailing wooden boards to the doors and windows. There were many people and their hands were fast. In a short while, the room where the empress was imprisoned was turned into a cage that outsiders could see inside, but the pregnant woman couldn't come out. Prince Li moved closer to the window and looked at the silent empress sitting on the warm kang by the window. I really admire you for being so calm. I want to see how long you can remain calm. But you are much stronger than that old woman. The Empress Dowager was scared witless in the blink of an eye and knelt down to beg for mercy. The Empress almost blurted out a curse. But she told herself again and again that she couldn't be impulsive. She had to think about her child. As long as there was a glimmer of hope, she had to seize the opportunity. Therefore, the Empress still didn't provoke Prince Li. She just lowered her eyes and didn't look at him. Prince Li laughs out loud. Good, not bad, I like a calm woman like you. Forget it, just stay here. Turning around, he ordered his trusted subordinates, as well as his trusted aides who had infiltrated the Jinwu guards and imperial bodyguards. A Taitan spy has infiltrated the palace. You must protect the Empress Dowager and the Empress well. This king still has to go to the imperial study to read memorials. If you have any news, remember to inform this king. Yes. Wang Yi. Everyone responded in unison. Prince Li glanced at the clear night sky, then walked quickly to the imperial study in high spirits. After tonight, there would be no more Li Qitian, no more Pang Xiao. Your Majesty and Prince Zhongshiren? Weren't they trapped in the underground palace and buried alive? If he was alive, he wanted to see him. If he was dead, he wanted to see his corpse. If it's easy, then I'll continue to excavate the underground palace. As for those people in the Wangfu, perhaps Prince Zhongshiren's wife and Prince Zhongshiren were deeply in love. In order to die for love, they set a fire and accidentally burned everyone in the Wangfu to death. Don't believe it? Then perhaps it was the Taitan's doing. In any case, Prince Zhongshiren's wife was the main culprit who killed Anari Khan. It wasn't impossible for them to come to seek revenge. Commandery Prince Li had calculated everything and felt that his arrangement was flawless. He went to the imperial study proudly to wait for the news. At this time, the Wangfu had indeed fallen into a sea of fire. On a mountain not far from the Wangfu, Qin Yining was sitting cross-legged. He had already wrapped himself in a large fur cloak. There was a lot of dirt on his hair and body, but he was particularly spirited and didn't look out of place. Qin Yining looked at the Wangfu in front of him, which was on fire. He asked with some worry, there won't be any casualties among the people you arranged, right? Liao Zhibing's face was covered in dirt. The trusted subordinates of the Green Sky Alliance beside him were also covered in dirt. Everyone laughed when they heard this. Liao Zhibing said, Alliance Master, don't worry. Our brothers may have made mistakes in other things, but this isn't a difficult matter. There are enough corpses left in the Wangfu. The tunnel is also hidden. Our brothers are all good at escaping, so we'll find an opportunity to withdraw. Qin Yining was relieved. It's good that there won't be any casualties. Our brothers are all born and raised by their parents. There's no need for us to lose our lives for these things. They looked at each other with smiles on their faces. Liao Zhibing smiled and said, Alliance Master, the night wind is cold. Why don't you go back first, so you don't get cold sitting here for too long? There's no rush. Let's take a look. The view here is very good. We can see the whole situation. If there's any change, we can remedy it. Liao Zhibing naturally knew that Qin Yining was right. He was only worried that Qin Yining's body wouldn't be able to take it. He lowered his head and glanced at her belly. It looked like she was about to give birth. If it happened on this mountain, who would be able to deliver the baby with a group of men and only 2 little girls? Liao Zhibing thought a lot, but he also thought the same thing when he saw Qin Yining's body. Bing Tang and Ji Yun were both wrapped in thick fur collars. Their faces were also like little kittens. They huddled close to Qin Yining to help keep her warm. Compared to outsiders, Bing Tang understood Qin Yining's body better. If there were no accidents, the 2 little rascals would have to stay in the princess consort's belly for another month. With so many people protecting them and not letting the princess consort tire, there wouldn't be any problems. Qin Yining didn't know what was going on in the minds of the people beside him. Qin Yining looked at the fire at the foot of the mountain. The 3 entrances and the garden of the Prince's Fu were all engulfed in a sea of fire. The surrounding commoners were shouting loudly and sounding gongs as they rushed to put out the fire. In the end, Qin Yining felt that it was a pity. Such a good home was gone just like that. Perhaps this was the first residence she lived in after getting married, so she had a lot of feelings for it. Although Jing was large, news traveled quickly. The weather was dry, and the Wang Fu occupied a large area. After the fire, half the sky of the capital was red. The neighbors nearby all hurriedly evacuated their people. They watched as the people of the warden's office and the Water Dragon Bureau frantically tried to put out the fire, but to no avail. They could only watch as the fire grew more and more intense. The late autumn night wind in the north was cold, but the people around the Prince's Fu only felt their faces burning hot from the fire. The cold sweat on their bodies was then cooled by the cold wind. What should we do? What's wrong with the court? So many things have happened in Jing recently. Prince Zhongxian is a great contributor. Are all the family members of the Prince Yu's mansion trapped inside? I haven't seen anyone escape. I heard that the princess consort is still pregnant. The surrounding people all sighed. Wang Yi's family, who had so many military achievements, was too pitiful. Although the imperial family didn't spread the news that Your Majesty was buried in the underground palace, it couldn't be stopped from spreading it outside. Who in the capital didn't know that Your Majesty was digging for some treasure? When he went to the underground palace to dig, the heavens punished him and the palace exploded. It collapsed, and even many of the court's ministers were buried. Recently, almost all of the high-ranking officials in the capital had a funeral. Prince Zhongxian was one of them. Not to mention that he was buried in the underground palace and couldn't be rescued, even his Prince's Fu was burned down. Could it be that it was because this prince had killed too many people during his campaigns? The sound of discussion couldn't hide the crackling of wood. While people were putting out the fire and hiding from the disaster, a man quietly withdrew from the crowd. At this time, it was chaotic. How could they notice him when they were sleeping? In the imperial study, Prince Li was pacing back and forth. The polished marble floor made a clear sound when the soles of Commandery Prince Li's boots bumped against the polished marble floor. The sound of tap, tap was annoying. Looking at the sky, it was already the 3rd watch. Why hadn't there been any good news from outside the palace? Just as Prince Li was anxiously waiting, the sound of footsteps came from outside, followed by a lowered male voice. "Royal Prince. Come in," Prince Li anxiously ordered. That person accepted the order and came in. He knelt on one knee and saluted, saying, "Wang Yi, it's done." Prince Li tightly clenched his sleeves. "Speak clearly." "Yes. Our people first tampered with the well water in the Prince's Fu and then killed their way in. There were only a few people who could resist. The rest were knocked unconscious and blocked in the room with a fire. Later." "Who asked you that?" Prince Li leaned forward and anxiously asked in a low voice, "I asked you, did that person get it?" Replying to the royal prince, he was already killed. "Killed?" "Yes." Prince Li slowly straightened his body. The smile on his face seemed to move in slow motion, slowly climbing to the corners of his eyes. Good, good, very good. Prince Li took a few steps back and slumped into his chair. He only felt that his nerves, which had been stretched taut all day, suddenly relaxed. Only then did he realize that he was already drenched in sweat. Li Chitian was dead. Li Chitian, that self-proclaimed smart and arrogant guy, actually died like this. Prince Li's heart was incomparably carefree, and he laughed loudly. In the spacious imperial study, his laughter echoed like the sound of a bell. The subordinate half knelt on the ground. Seeing Prince Li laugh, he also breathed a sigh of relief. After a moment, Prince Li's laughter seemed to have been strangled by someone, and it came to an abrupt stop. When the subordinate saw this, he immediately became nervous. Wang Yi? That won't do. If he's alive, I want to see him. If he's dead, I want to see his corpse. Prince Li stood up, saying, Li Chitian is sinister and cunning. This king will only be at ease after confirming that he's truly dead. Make preparations, this king wants to leave the palace. Wang Yi, I'm afraid this is not appropriate. The palace gates are currently closed. With such a big incident happening in the capital, this king is concerned about the court officials. It's normal for him to be concerned about the fire in Prince Zhengxian's fu. Why can't he go? Stop being so long-winded and quickly go make preparations. Chapter 632. At this time, Qin Yining was still standing guard at the top of the mountain. The sky was a bit gloomy, and dark clouds covered the moon and stars. The entire capital seemed to be shrouded in a huge shadow. Only the fire in the prince's mansion was still burning, and thick smoke billowed into the night sky. The orange light of the fire was weaker than before, but it still looked like it could reignite at any time. Liao Zhibing whispered, Alliance Master, we've waited for so long, but there's still no news from the palace. Will Prince Li not come out? Qin Yining smiled and said, Don't worry. From Prince Li's behavior these days, he must be a cautious and suspicious person. Otherwise, he wouldn't have waited until all the doubts were resolved before revealing his true face. The matter in the prince's mansion was arranged by him. After his subordinate's report, he will definitely come out and see for himself. Only when he sees your Majesty's corpse with his own eyes can he be completely at ease. Liao Zhibing nodded. This prince is also a person of importance. Qin Yining only smiled and didn't say anything. Was Prince Li a person of importance? Maybe he was. However, to put it bluntly, he was nothing more than a short-sighted villain. The Tatan's Yutjin Khan was not to be trifled with. He had already attacked Heaven's Gate, and the southern Yang was rising in the south. The Empress Dowager and Prince Li only looked at the benefits in front of them. They didn't think that once the Tatan's iron hooves stepped into the capital, even if they sat on the throne, what could they do? Facing Yutjin Khan, the higher the position, the faster they would die. These people didn't think about fighting the enemy, and instead started to fight among themselves. Even she, as a woman, found it ridiculous. Everyone waited for a while, and suddenly a brother from the Qingtian Alliance came up the mountain. Alliance Master, Mr. Liao, Prince Li has already left the palace and is heading towards the prince's mansion. Everyone heard this and let out a sigh of relief. In any case, as long as Prince Li was willing to leave the palace, it was fine. Qin Yining stood up and stretched her legs with the help of Bing Tang and Ji Yun. Not only was her body heavy now, but because her stomach was too big, it was squeezing the organs in her abdomen. She needed to urinate after a while, but now she wanted to go again. Liao Zhibing led the alliance members and continued to stare at the foot of the mountain. Qin Yining went to solve the problem with the help of 2 maidservants. When he came back, he saw Xie Yu and 2 familiar-looking guards standing together with Liao Zhibing. They were chatting. Mr. Xie. Qin Yining walked over slowly. Why are you here? Xie Yu smiled and saluted. Your Highness. It was Wang Yi who was worried about you and asked me to bring some people to escort you back. It's getting late. Wang Yi is really worried about you being on the mountain. Qin Yining smiled and said, There are so many brothers on the mountain. My safety can be guaranteed. But it's not convenient for you. Xiaoyu persuaded, now that the matter is more or less settled, it's better to leave. The brothers of the Qingtian alliance should go back and tidy up and rest. Your Highness also needs a good night's sleep. Even if you don't look after Wang Yi, you still have to look after the two in your stomach. Qin Yining subconsciously rubbed her stomach. After thinking about it, Xiaoyu's words made sense. They could just leave two people here to take turns to observe the situation. There was no need for everyone to stay up all night. All right. Qin Yining nodded and said to Liao Zhibing, I'll have to trouble Mr. Liao to choose two brothers to stay behind and observe the situation. Liao Zhibing nodded and said, that's easy. Alliance Master can go with Wang Yi's people. I'll make some arrangements and take the rest of the brothers to rest. Qin Yining nodded and gave a few more instructions. Then, he rode down the mountain on a roller coaster and changed to a carriage. The fire at the Wang estate was too big of a commotion, so the patrols in the city were much more lax than before. Xiaoyu and two imperial bodyguards protected Qin Yining's carriage. Soon, they arrived at a private residence not far from the imperial palace. At this time, looking from outside the walls, the residence was no different from other residences. It was pitch black, and the owner was clearly sleeping. Xiaoyu rhythmically knocked on the door knocker. Not long after, someone came to answer the door. Qin Yining led the two servant girls and followed Xiaoyu into the pitch-black courtyard. They carefully arrived at the door of the residence. Someone opened the door and even lifted the curtains. A ray of bright light shone out. Qin Yining realized that there were curtains hanging on the doors and windows of the residence to block out the light. Your Majesty, the Prince Zhongxian's consort, has returned. As soon as Qin Yining entered the residence, someone came in to report. She had just turned around the floor-to-ceiling screen when she saw Li Qitian sitting at the head of the table in the side hall. Pang Xiao and Ji Zhayu were standing beside Li Qitian. Seeing Qin Yining enter, Li Qitian immediately stood up. Qin Yining curtsied to Li Qitian and said, "Long live your Majesty and be in good health." Li Qitian had already arrived in front of them. He raised his hands and said extremely politely, "You may dispense with the formalities. You've worked hard this time." She was not used to Li Qitian's courteous treatment of Qin Yining. Ever since this plan, Qin Yining had no choice but to reveal the trump card of the Qingtian alliance because of the lack of manpower. Li Qitian had shown her unprecedented respect and politeness. His attitude towards her was not like how one would treat an official's family member, but more like how one would treat one's own subordinates. Therefore, Qin Yining felt that Li Qitian was worthy of admiration. He really had his own way of using people. Qin Yining stood up and said with lowered eyes, "Your Majesty is overpraising me. This subject's wife doesn't dare to accept such praise. You're too modest. This time, it's all thanks to the efforts of your subordinates. Otherwise, it wouldn't have gone so smoothly. After this matter is completed, I will definitely reward you handsomely. Contributing to your Majesty is contributing to the country. How could I dare to ask for any reward? Your Majesty shouldn't say such things." After the two sides exchanged some pleasantries, Pang Xiao and Ji Ziyu's personal guards were all dumbfounded. Everyone couldn't help but think that Prince Zhongxian's wife was really a powerful person. It was no wonder that Prince Zhongxian was so infatuated with her. "Sit down and talk." Li Qitian smiled and gestured for them to sit down. Pang Xiao opened his mouth and asked Qin Yining to sit down beside him. Li Qitian asked, "How's the matter going? How's the situation outside?" Qin Yining said respectfully, replying to your Majesty, "The matter outside is as expected. The fire in the prince's mansion has attracted enough attention. Prince Li has already led his men out of the palace." Qin Yining looked at Pang Xiao and Ji Zhayu. "How are the arrangements on your side?" Pang Xiao smiled. "With your Majesty in charge, there's nothing that can't be done. Don't worry, everything has been arranged. I'm sure there will be good news soon." Ji Zhayu also nodded in agreement. Li Qitian smiled from the bottom of his heart. Although the situation was tense, he never lost his fighting spirit. Now everything is ready except for the east wind. Let's see how the news is from there. Everyone nodded in agreement. Pang Xiao stood up and said, Your Majesty, I'll take my wife to wash up and rest first. Li Chitian smiled gently and said, Go ahead. Thank you for your hard work today. Chapter 633. Qin Yining followed behind Pang Xiao to a side room. It was already late at night, and in order to prevent others from discovering their hiding place, only a silk lamp was lit in the room, and thick curtains were drawn over the doors and windows. 2 large wooden buckets of hot water had already been prepared behind the screen. Pang Xiao helped Qin Yining to sit behind the screen, and his large hand with distinct joints helped her remove the grass clinging to her hair. We have limited resources, so why don't we clean ourselves properly? You're so tired that you still have to crawl through the tunnel. It really makes me feel bad. Qin Yining took the hot handkerchief Pang Xiao handed to her to wipe her face. The situation was tense now, and it was not the time for her to be fussy. She did not mind that she could not take a thorough bath. Don't think like that. Although the tunnel is narrow, it's not particularly difficult to walk through. Besides, it's better to be covered in dirt than to be injured. A cold glint flashed across Pang Xiao's eyes. Let's see who dares to hurt you. Qin Yining was amused by his protective manner and stuffed the handkerchief back to him. Don't be nervous. I'm right under your nose. Who has the ability to hurt me? Besides, we're considered to be strong allies this time. You, Your Majesty, and Marquis Dingbei are all good at scheming. This plan is the most direct and fastest choice. I believe that by this time tomorrow, everything will return to normal. Pang Xiao washed the handkerchief, took Qin Yining's fair and delicate hands, and clumsily wiped them for her. Anyway, I can only be calm when you're by my side. If I'm not with you, I don't know what to do. Qin Yining's heart was filled with waves of warmth. She looked at him with a smile. You're such a glib talker. A man's ambition is to travel far. If your subordinates heard what you said today, let's see if they'll still be convinced by you in the future. Pang Xiao threw the handkerchief away, hugged Qin Yining, and bit the corner of her mouth. If they're not convinced, I'll just beat them up. I just want to give you a period of peace. Wang Yi. Before Qin Yining could reply, a servant outside the door said in a low voice, Bodyguard Deng is back. Pang Xiao's expression froze. Got it. He turned around and said to Qin Yining, Huzi is back. I've arranged for him to go to the palace. You can sleep in your room for a while. I'll go to Your Majesty's place to listen to the situation. Qin Yining said, I'm not sleepy at all right now. I can't sleep with such a big matter on my mind. Let me go with you. Seeing Qin Yining's firm attitude, Pang Xiao couldn't help but sigh. All right. Anyway, I originally planned to stay with you and never let you out of my sight. Let's go. Qin Yining nodded and was supported by Pang Xiao back to the council chamber. Huzi was kneeling on one knee and reporting to Li Chitian. Fortunately, I didn't disappoint you. Your Majesty's prophecy is divine. The Prince Regent really left the palace. I took people and immediately took back the palace. Good. Li Chitian was a bit excited, and his voice couldn't help but rise. What's the situation in the palace? Replying to Your Majesty, the Empress Dowager was besieged and frightened, but it's not serious. The Empress was locked in the cunning palace. Prince Li ordered people to board up the doors and windows, and didn't leave anything for the Empress to eat or drink. Fortunately, the Empress has a strong temperament and wasn't too agitated. The Empress and the dragon fetus are safe and sound. As soon as they heard that Prince Li actually locked up the pregnant Empress and didn't give her food or drink, everyone present frowned. Especially Qin Yining. As a pregnant woman, she understood the hardships of pregnancy the most. If she was locked up without food or drink at this time, it would be very easy for her to collapse. The fact that the Empress was safe and sound was enough to show that her temperament was very tenacious. Li Chitian suppressed a fire in his heart. He couldn't bear Prince Li's various evil deeds. He only thought that he must eat his flesh and sleep on his skin to vent his hatred. However, now that the strategy of luring the tiger away from the mountain had worked and the palace had been taken back, it wasn't impossible to take down Prince Li Jin's nose. Sure enough, The people around Shiji are very capable and can lead the troops of Prince Zhengxian's and Prince Consort's manor back to the palace. Jin will give you a great merit. Huzi hurriedly said, this commoner doesn't dare to claim credit. It's just that after we entered the palace, we only needed to show the banner of your majesty when we encountered resistance. Most people would join us against a common enemy. It can be seen that Prince Li only took down a small number of people. Most people still hold your majesty in high esteem and are looking forward to your majesty's return. These words made Li Chitian feel very comfortable. During these days of wandering about, everything Li Chitian owned, including his life, was almost taken away. He really couldn't accept losing again and again. Now that someone told him that there were still people willing to continue to be loyal to him, the joy brought by this news was equivalent to telling him that he had successfully taken back the palace. Li Chitian reached out his hands to help Huzi up. Huzi was overwhelmed by this favor and repeatedly said, this commoner doesn't dare. Huzi was Pang Xiao's imperial bodyguard. He was no longer a member of the army and had no official rank in the imperial court. Pang Xiao saw that Li Chitian didn't ask, so he asked worriedly, how are the casualties in the palace? This time, the people Huzi brought with him were all trusted aides of Pang Xiao and Ji Zheyu. Excluding these people, the palace's Yulin guards, Jinwu guards, and other people were all living beings. If the soldiers fought the Taitan and spilled blood on the battlefield, Pang Xiao would be distressed, but he wouldn't be so impatient. However, the problem was that this time's sacrifice was due to side issues. Huzi said, replying to Wang Yi, the casualties in the palace are still okay. There aren't many. Then it wasn't a small number. Pang Xiao and Ji Zheyu lowered their eyes at the same time. They felt very uncomfortable in their hearts. Li Chitian said with a smile, I will heavily reward those who helped take back the throne. Those who contributed this time will be heavily rewarded. Thank you, Your Majesty. Several people bowed and responded in a low voice. In Li Chitian's eyes, even if all the people who attacked the palace died, there wouldn't be more than 1,000 people. Moreover, these were the elites of Pang Xiao and Ji Zheyu. It would be better if they died. For a battle to take back the throne, he felt that the sacrifice of 1,000 people was very little. Li Chitian stood in high spirits with his hands behind his back. Although there were dark curtains blocking the light in front of him, he felt as if he was in the throne room and everything was under his control. Today is the day of the imperial court meeting. Have you notified the people to go to court? Pang Xiao said, replying to Your Majesty, we have already thought of a way to notify them. Very good. Everyone. Li Chitian suddenly turned around and said proudly, follow me back to the palace. Yes. After the order was given, everyone left the antechamber without hesitation. A spacious carriage had already been prepared in front of the courtyard gate. Several Jinghu Wei lined up neatly on the left and right. Li Chitian boarded the carriage first. Then he reached out his hand to Pang Xiao and Ji Zheyu and said with a smile, my two brothers, follow me into the carriage. Pang Xiao and Ji Zheyu looked at each other. They didn't refuse and jumped into the carriage one after another. Li Chitian looked at the pot-bellied Qin Yining and said with a smile, sister-in-law, get in the carriage too. Chapter 634. Qin Yining's body was heavy, so she naturally wouldn't make things difficult for herself. She immediately knelt down to express her gratitude. Why are you still standing there? Hurry up and help your wife up. Li Chitian didn't even allow her to finish her bow. He urged Pang Xiao to get up. His tone was intimate, as if he was his own brother. Pang Xiao smiled and agreed. He simply jumped down from the carriage and easily carried Qin Yining to the carriage. Then, he sat down next to her. The carriage was very spacious, so there was still a lot of space for 4 people. Li Chitian sat upright in his seat. Pang Xiao and Ji Zheyu talked in a low voice the entire way. During this time, they didn't neglect Qin Yining. Qin Yining could tell that after being forced to reveal his power, Li Chitian no longer viewed her as an official's wife. Instead, he viewed her as a capable subordinate on the same level as Pang Xiao and Ji Zheyu. Not long after, the group of people successfully entered the palace. Qin Yining couldn't help but lift the curtains and look outside. In the dark night, there were dark brown marks on the red palace walls and floor tiles. There were even corpses of palace servants and imperial bodyguards that hadn't been cleaned up in time. The wooden carriage wheels rolled on the silent palace road, making a series of noises. Because of the pitch-black surroundings and the smell of blood, everything seemed eerie and strange. A place like the imperial palace had always accumulated resentment. "Sister Yi, don't look." Pang Xiao held Qin Yining's shoulders and straightened her body. At this time, except for Li Qitian, none of the other 3 people in the carriage felt good. In Li Qitian's eyes, such casualties were not worth mentioning. He would even think that it was worth it to kill these people to take back the throne. In fact, the plan that Qin Yining and Pang Xiao had come up with was indeed the least costly way to take back the city. However, when they saw the blood-stained brick walls and ground, and even people like Pang Xiao and Ji Ziyu saw with their own eyes that their close subordinates had died in such a conspiracy for power, but their blood was not spilled on the battlefield. The pain in their hearts was not something that others could understand. "Your Majesty." Outside the carriage, Huzi said, "The Empress is in the Empress Dowager's palace right now. Your Majesty, do you want to go to the Imperial Study or the Xi'an Palace to pay respects to the Empress Dowager?" Li Qitian looked at the sky, thought for a while, and then said, "Of course I have to pay respects to the Empress Dowager first." "Yes." Huzi ordered, "Prepare the carriage for Xi'an Palace." The carriage followed the palace road to Xi'an Palace. The guards in front of Xi'an Palace saw a spacious and gorgeous carriage slowly coming in surrounded by guards from afar, and they all went forward to salute. A clever eunuch stepped back a few steps, turned around, and ran to the Empress Dowager to deliver the message. He cheered loudly, "Empress Dowager, Empress, your Majesty is back." At this time, the Empress Dowager was guarding a silk lamp. She took a cold handkerchief from a palace servant and pressed it on her eyes that were swollen from crying. Hearing this, she stood up excitedly and almost overturned the palace lamp. "What did you say? Is it really your Majesty? If you dare to deceive me, I will kill you." "This servant doesn't dare to lie. Your Majesty is really back." The little eunuch was so scared that he knelt down with a plop. The Empress had already stood up and walked to the palace door with the help of the palace servants beside her. Tears kept rolling in her eyes. "Your Majesty is back. It's really him." The Empress had never been so shocked in her life. First, she was nailed to death in her own palace by Prince Li. He even said that he would starve her to death without food or water. If her mind wasn't so strong, she might have committed suicide in despair on the spot. She didn't expect that she would grit her teeth and persist. She didn't even have the chance to carry out the methods she thought of to survive. That night, Pang Xiao and Ji Ziyu's subordinates killed their way into the palace and rescued her. The Empress was very grateful to Pang Xiao and Ji Ziyu. She now understood. When Your Majesty was trapped in the underground palace, only Ji Ziyu was willing to put in so much effort. He stayed on the mountain and swore that he wouldn't go down until he rescued Your Majesty. From the Empress Dowager's words, the Empress learned that Qin Yining came to the palace today to deliver a letter for Your Majesty. In addition, now that the Imperial Palace has been recaptured, Your Majesty has safely returned to the palace. It was clear who was right and who was wrong, who was evil and who was evil. If it weren't for Ji Ziyu and Pang Xiao, she and the child in her belly would probably have died. Could she hope that she would be so scared that she would lose her mind? That her extremely selfish mother-in-law would come to save her? The Empress's eyes darkened. She held her waist and walked out. The Empress Dowager was faster than her. The Empress Dowager, who had been so scared that her legs were trembling, now walked like the wind. Her movements were comparable to that of a young eunuch. My son is fine." The Empress Dowager excitedly rushed to the front of Xi'an Palace and saw Qin Yining get off the carriage with Pang Xiao's help. Then, Ji Ziyu lightly jumped down. Li Qitian finally stepped on the footstool with the help of 2 officials. "My son." The Empress Dowager opened her arms and rushed over. She hugged Li Qitian and said, "My son, you want your mother's life. I thought you were already. If you didn't come back, your mother wouldn't want to live." The sadness and sorrow that had accumulated for many days were all vented at this moment. The Empress Dowager cried so much that even the imperial guards felt moved. The Empress stood not far away, holding her belly. She looked at all of this and felt that it was funny. Did the Empress Dowager think that everyone was blind? Was she worried about her son? Maybe she was worried. But her son's life was not as important as her life, not as important as the glory of her family. Now, she showed such a face, which made people feel that it was ridiculous. Li Chitian smiled and patted the Empress Dowager's back. Imperial Mother, I came back safely. You should be happy. Imperial Mother, don't be sad. The Empress Dowager patted Li Chitian's back and squeezed his arm. My son has lost weight. You've lost so much weight. Li Chitian smiled and said, it's already hard for me to keep my life. Imperial Mother, don't cry. Yes, Empress Dowager. The Empress smiled and came forward. Your Majesty and 2 brothers have worked hard. Let's sit down and talk about what happened after we parted. Hearing how the Empress Dowager addressed Ji Ziyu and Pang Xiao, Li Chitian immediately felt that they were of the same mind. Looking at the Empress Dowager's belly, which was bigger than he remembered, he nodded with satisfaction and said, Zitong is right. It's late at night and cold. It won't be good if Imperial Mother catches a cold. Let's go in and talk. The Empress Dowager had no choice but to nod. With Li Chitian's help, she sobbed all the way into the hall. Qin Yining and Pang Xiao walked side by side at the back. The night wind blew away the thick smell of blood, but Qin Yining's senses were sharp. The thick smell of blood that she saw along the way still made her feel suffocated. Pang Xiao put an arm around her shoulder and whispered with heartache, Are you not feeling well? Later, I'll get someone to find a room and let Bing Tang and Ji Yun wait on you to rest. With your current body, how can you endure staying up all night? Qin Yining was indeed a bit tired. Looking at the sky, she said, It's fine. I still want to stay by your side. It's safer. Pang Xiao agreed, You're right. The palace isn't completely safe. Hold on a bit longer. We can rest in peace once we're done. Qin Yining smiled and nodded. Just as Li Chitian and the others were discussing the recent situation in the capital with the Empress Dowager and the Empress, Prince Li and Marquis Qingyang were at Prince Zhongshuan's residence, inspecting the situation. The fire had just been extinguished. The charred ruins were still smoking. In some places, the original outlines could still be seen. Charred corpses were placed on the ground. Many of them had been burned to the point that they had shriveled up. It could only be seen that they were originally people. In front of Prince Li and Marquis Qingyang was a male corpse whose body was charred black, but whose facial outline could still be considered complete. Seeing Li Chitian's familiar face that was half charred and lying on the ground, Prince Li almost laughed out loud. Li Chitian was dead. All the people in Pang Xiao's residence were buried with him. It was really satisfying. In this way, his ascension to the throne was justified. He was originally Li Chitian's younger cousin. In times of crisis, he was entrusted by the Empress Dowager to supervise the country. The emperor was on his way. Who could say no to his ascension to the throne? What's more, the situation in the court was tense. He believed that his ascension to the throne would give the court officials a backbone. No one would be unwilling. When the time came, he would arrange for the Tiger Army to rescue Heaven's Gate Pass and drive the Titan out of Daeju. His position would be even more stable. Thinking of this, Prince Li pursed his lips and gritted his teeth. He forced a sorrowful appearance and ordered the people around him, Deal with these corpses. Carry this one out. We're going back to see the Empress Dowager. Yes. His trusted subordinates moved quickly. They ignored the rest of the corpses and temporarily didn't care about the charred corpses. They found a wooden board and only carried out Li Chitian's corpse. The sky was dark. Prince Li and Marquis Qingyang silently walked through the scorched prince's estate. Their moods were very high. Unexpectedly, when they arrived at the gate, Prince Li and Marquis Qingyang saw many officials' palanquins and carriages heading in the direction of the imperial palace. In the prince's estate's location, there were many neighbors who were officials in the court. Looking at the sky, it was almost time for the morning court. But as the regent, how come he didn't remember requesting to attend court today? Marquis Qingyang asked doubtfully. Did the royal prince arrange for morning court today? Wasn't it said that something happened to your majesty and many court officials were injured, so the court was temporarily suspended for repairs? Prince Li was also very puzzled. This king did arrange for repairs. That's strange. I'll go ask. Marquis Qingyang was about to chase after a carriage in front of him, but he was pulled back by Prince Li. You can't ask like that. Prince Li gave a meaningful glance to the person behind him. The attendant behind him immediately understood and went to inquire. Prince Li then said, "This king was ordered by the empress to be the regent. How could he not know about the morning court? If you ask like this, wouldn't you be telling others that this king doesn't know anything?" Only then did Marquis Qingyang come to his senses. He smiled a bit awkwardly. I was impatient. Prince Li rolled his eyes but didn't say anything. Not long after, the attendant quickly walked back and said in a low voice, "Royal Prince, it is said that all the officials were following orders. Today's court will be held as usual. This king is here. Whose orders were they following?" Prince Li narrowed his eyes. Could it be that old witch? He didn't think that the cowardly Empress Dowager in front of him would have this kind of method. Chapter 635. The retainer did not find out who had ordered the ministers to attend court. Seeing his master angry, he naturally did not dare to say a word. Marquis Qingyang rubbed his inexplicably cold forehead and said in a low voice, "Things aren't right. Could it be that something has gone wrong? Impossible. This king's plan was flawless. How could there be a flaw at this time? The Empress Dowager must have deceived us." Prince Li gnashed his teeth. Marquis Qingyang waved his hand with a wry smile. "Impossible. Do you think I don't know my older sister's personality? Moreover, the royal prince also saw it. She is timid and an ordinary woman. She can't cause any waves." Prince Li's anxiety and anger were forcefully suppressed. He turned his head to look at the charred ruins of the estate and then looked at the corpse that had been carried out by the retainer and placed in the carriage. Commandery Prince Li did not know what was going on. Suddenly, he had an idea. He strode toward the carriage and observed it carefully. Marquis Qingyang furrowed his brows and pinched his nose as he also walked over. What is the royal prince doing? What is there to look at in a dead person? Prince Li completely ignored the noisy Marquis Qingyang. He took a lamp from his retainer and used the weak light of dawn to carefully examine Li Qitian's face. In the end, he discovered that there was something wrong with the burnt skin. Prince Li's heart skipped a beat. Without caring whether it was dirty or not, he reached out to grab at the corpse's face. Marquis Qingyang thought that Prince Li was overly nervous and cried out in alarm, "What are you doing?" Before he could finish speaking, he saw that Prince Li had already peeled off the skin on the corpse's face. The thin layer of skin was still burned with ash and blood. Under the orange light of the lantern, it appeared particularly frightening. But even more frightening was still to come. Under the skin was another unfamiliar face. That was not Li Qitian at all. Prince Li blankly clutched the tattered skin mask in his hand. His entire body shivered and the hairs on his back stood on end. How could it be fake? If Li Qitian was not dead, then what was the cause of the fire in the mansion? That's right, the charred corpses in the prince's mansion were barely recognizable as human bones. It was impossible to tell whether they were male or female. Therefore, there might not be any female members of the prince's mansion among them. There was something strange about the fire in the mansion. Li Qitian's corpse was fake, and the ministers came to court for no reason. When these 3 points were connected, even if Prince Li was an idiot, he would still be able to understand. He had been tricked. The fire this time had planned everything. The other party had grasped his mentality tightly and lured him out of the palace with a plot to beat him at his own game. At this time, Li Qitian might have already taken back the imperial palace. Prince Li's whole body trembled like a sieve, and he almost couldn't stand straight. The Marquis of Qingyang was no better than Prince Li. His mind was filled with Li Qitian's viciousness and majesty. What should we do? What should we do? If your Majesty returns, would there be any good outcome for the two of us? Your plan definitely won't be able to escape. Even I will be finished with you. Your Majesty cares about military power the most. Didn't you see that Pang Zhishi's military power was taken away? I, the Commander-in-Chief of the Tiger Army, refused to listen to your Majesty's decree to support Tianmen Guan. If your Majesty knew, he would punish me for neglecting my duty. Prince Li's expression was gloomy, and the trembling of his body gradually calmed down. The Marquis of Qingyang anxiously said, "The only thing we can do now is quickly enter the palace and beg my sister. My sister is the Empress Dowager. If we say a few good words in front of your Majesty, we might still be safe." Prince Li suddenly looked at the Marquis of Qingyang and coldly said, "If you want to throw yourself into a trap, go yourself. Did you forget how you treated the Empress Dowager? The Empress Dowager's brain isn't filled with water. If I see you now, I will definitely ruthlessly retaliate. Also, how will you see the Empress Dowager? Since Li Qitian has the ability to announce a court appearance, that means he has already taken back the imperial palace. As long as the two of us approach, we will be directly captured and sent to Li Qitian before we even see the Empress Dowager." The Marquis of Qingyang's face turned deathly pale. He felt as if the sky was about to collapse. How did things develop to this point? Everything was originally fine, so why did it all suddenly turn into bubbles? Then what do you think we should do? The Marquis of Qingyang was already in a mess. He could only look at Prince Li. Prince Li gritted his teeth and immediately said, "In for a penny, in for a pound." In any case, quite a few Tartar spies have sneaked in. Otherwise, Li Qitian wouldn't have been buried alive. Right now, who knows if there are Tartar spies hiding in the palace walls, wanting to harm the Empress Dowager and Empress? You're saying, you want to attack the imperial palace? The Marquis of Qingyang was shocked and lowered his voice. Prince Li said, "Either wait for death or take a gamble. If you want to die, I won't stop you. I can guarantee that as long as you approach the palace walls, you will immediately be tied up and sent to Li Qitian. At that time, how you die will not be up to you." The Marquis of Qingyang shivered. His eyes gradually turned from panic to determination. "Good, then let's take a gamble. Don't forget, this Marquis is currently the Commander-in-Chief of the Tiger Army." Seeing the Marquis of Qingyang so tactful, Prince Li inwardly let out a sigh of relief. He turned around and ordered, "There are Tartar spies who have sneaked into the imperial palace and pretended to be your Majesty with bad intentions. Immediately dispatch all the soldiers of the 5 cities warden's office. We have to protect the Empress Dowager, and protect the unborn dragon's son." Yes. Prince Li's loyal subordinates immediately went to the 5 cities warden's office to report this. The 5 cities warden's office was in charge of the capital's security and other matters. The soldiers of the 5 cities warden's office added up to at least 10,000 people. In addition, the Marquis of Qingyang had dispatched the Tiger Army. With such an offensive, it wasn't impossible for them to fight with all their might. At this time, in Heavenly Worship Palace, all of the capital's civil and military officials above the 5th rank were already standing in line. Everyone was actually very uncomfortable in their hearts. Prince Li was the imperial relative chosen by the Empress Dowager to be regent. Although his personality was normally a bit soft, he still knew when to advance and retreat. As a regent, he had never made any arrangements to attend court. Why did he suddenly change his personality today? The officials all had grave expressions, their gazes pensive. Your Majesty and Prince Zhongshiren had already been buried for 21 days. What kind of person could persist for so many days without eating or drinking? The heavens of Daeju had probably already changed. They just didn't know why Prince Li had summoned them to court today. Among the officials, there were already some who were considering which side to side with. There were also some who were loyal to Li Qitian and were full of anger. For a moment, all of the officials' expressions were unsightly. At this time, a sharp voice unique to the officials came from outside. "Your Majesty has arrived." According to the rules, officials couldn't raise their heads to look directly at the emperor's face during court. Although all of the officials had a lot of complaints about Prince Li daring to call himself Your Majesty, not a single person disobeyed the rules at this time. Out of the corner of everyone's eyes, they saw a figure wearing a bright yellow dragon robe sitting on the dragon throne. The officials with their heads lowered couldn't see the appearance of the person sitting on the dragon throne. They could only see a pair of brand new golden coiling dragon boots. As expected, Prince Li had disloyal intentions. He wanted to rebel. Thinking back to the fire at Prince Zhongxian's residence yesterday, the officials all connected the dots. It seemed that Prince Li really couldn't wait any longer. At this time, a few people understood and willingly knelt down and shouted, "Long live Your Majesty." But there was also a portion of people who believed that Prince Li's actions were the actions of a traitor. They would rather die than admit that Prince Li had privately proclaimed himself emperor. As a result, the officials' salutes were all different. Those who had been bribed by Prince Li or those who wanted to protect themselves all knelt down and kowtowed. As for the stubborn old officials and the imperial censors who didn't fear death, they only stood with their heads lowered and slightly bent their knees. "Long live Your Majesty!" Everyone's voices were all over the place. Sitting upright on the throne, Li Chitian looked down at the officials who were saluting him with completely different postures. He couldn't help but feel comforted in his heart. Those who directly knelt down and said "Long live Your Majesty" only accounted for 20% of the total number of people. Those who refused to say "Long live Your Majesty" and refused to kneel down made up 80% of the total number of people. It seemed that his throne was still very stable. Even though he had disappeared for 20 days and people outside were saying that he had died, these loyal officials still didn't immediately recognize Prince Li. Li Chitian carefully remembered who knelt and who didn't kneel. Then he jokingly said, "What, you old fellows still don't kneel when you see me? Do you want to rebel?" Li Chitian's voice was loud and clear, echoing throughout the hall. When the officials with their heads lowered heard this familiar voice, they ignored the rule of not looking directly at Li Chitian's face and raised their heads one after another. They saw Li Chitian wearing an imperial robe and sitting upright on the dragon throne. Behind him, Pang Xiao and Ji Zheyu stood on his left and right. Surprisingly, there was also a beautiful pregnant woman standing next to Prince Zhongxian. "Your Majesty!" Everyone cried out in surprise. Li Chitian smiled and said, "Look, we have returned. Long live Your Majesty, long live Your Majesty. Your Majesty is the true Son of Heaven." This old official already knew that Your Majesty would definitely return safely. The officials all knelt down and saluted. There were even some who were so excited that tears streamed down their faces. In the midst of everyone's salutes, the 20% who first knelt down and recognized Prince Li were already trembling on both knees. "It's over, it's over, the person who shouldn't have returned is back." Wouldn't the next step be to purge them? At this time, they no longer cared about why there were other than Ji Zheyu and Pang Xiao behind Your Majesty, and even women standing together. They only wanted to think of a way to survive. They absolutely could not let Your Majesty think that they were all plotting a rebellion. Rebellion was a serious crime that could bring disaster to the entire clan. Just as everyone was feeling uneasy, the newly arrived Grand Eunuch Xiong Jinshui loudly announced, "Your Majesty has decreed that if there is something to report, report it early. If there is nothing to report, dismiss the court." As soon as these words were spoken, all the officials let out a sigh of relief. Your Majesty did not resolve the issue of rebellion during the court meeting. Instead, he only asked about the state's affairs. Where else could one find Your Majesty who placed state affairs as the most important thing? As a result, everyone seemed to have been injected with chicken blood and reported all the things that had accumulated during Li Chitian's absence. They even discussed it in the court. Chapter 636. Li Chitian was someone who could keep his composure. In Qin Yining's view, anyone who could not keep their composure would be punished if they were in Li Chitian's position. But just like how Li Chitian was able to suppress his fear of Pang Xiao for so many years, it was only after Pang Xiao returned from the Taitan that Li Chitian felt that his preparations were foolproof, that he ordered the impeachment. In the past, Li Chitian had always been able to endure and put on an act. Now, Li Chitian was using this ability on the people they were dealing with together. Qin Yining was somewhat tired. He quietly changed his standing position, shifting his weight to his other foot. When Pang Xiao, who was standing next to him, saw him move, he immediately went over to support him, allowing Qin Yining to lean on his body. Qin Yining was somewhat resistant. After all, they were standing in front of all the officials. The people below could see them as soon as they raised their heads. But Pang Xiao only held on to her, not letting go. He put his arm around her shoulders and adjusted her posture, allowing her to lean on him more comfortably. Qin Yining knew that Pang Xiao did not care about the gazes of outsiders. He felt helpless and warm in his heart, so he no longer struggled. He calmly leaned on him and listened to the memorials between the officials and Li Chitian. The officials' memorials were mainly about the war with the Taitan in the north. Because Marquis Qingyang claimed to be ill, the matter of sending reinforcements to Heaven's Gate has been put on hold. Now, Heaven's Gate's Dragon Stallion army is in a critical situation. I ask that Your Majesty make a decision as soon as possible. This official agrees. This official agrees. Li Chitian slowly nodded. He was well aware of Marquis Qingyang's temperament. The Empress Dowager's train of thought was correct in wanting to grasp both military power and political power, but her judgment in choosing people was truly too poor. We understand this matter. The matter of sending reinforcements to Heaven's Gate must be carried out. Everyone, Li Chitian's words were not finished, and his voice slowly weakened. Everyone also listened carefully, only to vaguely hear that there seemed to be noise outside the heavenly worship hall. Your Majesty, Pang Xiao said in a low voice, there seems to be fighting outside. When these words came out, the officials were in an uproar. What's going on? Could it be that thieves are stirring up trouble? The officials saw the traces left behind from the fierce battle in the palace. In addition, the fire last night's palace and Your Majesty's sudden return. The most important thing was that there would occasionally be eunuchs walking around outside during the court sessions, making it convenient for them to pass on orders. What should we do now? Some of the officials asked in panic. Li Chitian's expression was deep as he said, It's fine. The palace's Yulin guards and Jinwu guards are not to be trifled with. Even if there are thieves and rascals who dare to break into the palace is easy to defend and difficult to attack. People outside cannot break in. My dear officials, do not panic. It is important to continue to study the war in the north with us. Seeing that Li Chitian was so calm, the ministers had a backbone in their hearts. Li Chitian never did anything he wasn't sure of. Since he was able to hold his ground, it meant that he had been prepared. Therefore, the 20% of people who supported Prince Li at the beginning were now even more nervous. They almost directly knelt to Li Chitian. On the other hand, those who were loyal and devoted, or who acted cautiously and didn't kneel to salute, were slightly relaxed. Li Chitian continued to discuss the matters of the northern frontier with his ministers. In Qin Yining's view, Li Chitian's calmness could really play a calming role for the officials. But was the palace really okay? Qin Yining's gaze fell on the wide-open doors of the palace hall. In front of the spacious palace hall, the great Han generals stood like javelins. The plaza was empty and not a single person was moving. Moreover, the sounds of fighting and killing seemed to have become clearer. An hour ago, Prince Li led the warden's office of the 5 cities, as well as passers-by from the east, west, south, and north of the city. A total of 8,000 people gathered outside the palace walls. The warden's office of the 5 cities was responsible for the security of the imperial city. Naturally, there was a large number of people. The people who could be mobilized were all gathered in one place. Prince Li pointed in the direction of the palace and said bitterly, "Last night, thieves broke into the capital and set fire to Prince Zhongshiren's residence. Today, this prince has personally checked and found that none of Prince Zhongshan's family members were spared. They were all killed by the thieves." Everyone was silent. A sorrowful atmosphere spread through the crowd. The warden's office of the 5 cities was also a soldier. As long as they were a soldier or a man, There was no one who didn't admire Pang Xiao's bravery and fighting skills. Now that a famous general of a generation was trapped in the underground palace, he might have already become a corpse. Who would have thought that in the blink of an eye, disaster would fall from the sky? Wang Fei and Wang Yi's family members would also be killed. Wang Fei was also pregnant with twins, Wang Yi's blood. Everyone's heart was filled with sadness, which then turned into anger. Prince Li shouted with all his might. Prince Zhengxian's residence was burned to a crisp by the thieves. This king investigated and found that it was done by the Taitan. Everyone knows about the grudges between us and the Taitan. The most hateful thing is that they took advantage of this king's absence to rush in and occupy the palace. The crowd burst into an uproar. The Taitan were too savage. They broke through 3 checkpoints at the border and stopped at Tianmen Pass. Not only did they kill Prince Zhengxian's family members when they entered the capital, they even occupied the palace. In the palace, other than the Empress Dowager, there was the Empress and the concubines. The Empress and Prince Zhengxian's concubine were the same. They were both pregnant and could be pregnant with the future emperor. At this moment, the crowd was immediately stirred up. Prince Li's goal was achieved. He pointed to the palace and said, "Today, the spies occupied the palace. We must drive the spies out. Otherwise, wouldn't the foundation of the country be shaken?" Soldiers charged together with this king. When the warden's office of the 5 cities heard this, they immediately led their men to the gates of the palace. They were prepared to attack in one fell swoop, take down the thieves, and protect the imperial family. Seeing that these people were willing to go, Commandery Prince Li was relieved and secretly heaved a sigh of relief. As long as these idiots were willing to listen to his arrangements, they could attack Li Chitian today and kill him. In the future, Daju's country would be his. As long as he could obtain that position, all his problems would be solved. He wouldn't have to fear Li Chitian's revenge, nor would he have to be afraid of being cursed. Under his flawless plan, Li Chitian would definitely be assassinated by the Taitan spies. The gates of the palace were tightly shut. On the high outer wall of the main gate, the guards from Jinghu Wei saw the people of the 5 cities' warden's office gathered outside the gate. They turned pale with fright and ordered all the palace gates to be strictly guarded. The leader of the generals began to shout, "Who are you? You actually dare to trespass into the palace? Do you not want the weapons on your necks anymore?" The people of the 5 cities' warden's office had already determined that the palace was controlled by Taitan spies. The people who were speaking now must have become Taitan lackeys. Chapter 637. Translator, Transan Editor. Transan Daju's imperial palace was built on the foundation of Biji's imperial palace. The imperial palace was the emperor's home. A great deal of thought had been put into its construction in the early years. Not only was the imperial palace very sturdy, it was also easy to defend and difficult to attack. Other than Jinghu Wei and Ji Ziyu's soldiers who had attacked the imperial palace last night, there were only the remaining guards, imperial bodyguards, and eunuchs guarding the imperial palace. There were more than 8,000 people from the warden's office attacking the imperial palace. Even if they split up, there were still more people guarding the imperial palace. Relying on the geographical advantage, the 1,000 people guarding the imperial palace could barely hold on. However, the people of the warden's office were all riled up. They were determined to take back the imperial palace and cut the thieves into pieces. In their anger, their fighting strength increased by several levels. Although they were definitely not a match for Jinghu Wei, who came from the border army, their bravery was still fearsome. There was a great disparity in fighting strength. Moreover, after the warden's office, there might be Marquis Qingyang's tiger army. Huzi stood on the city wall and looked down. He had seen the scene of close to 10,000 people shouting and killing many times when he had followed Pang Xiao to the border. This was the first time he had seen close to 10,000 people gathered in the capital and shouting and killing at the imperial palace. With such a big thing happening right under the emperor's feet, the common people in the city had long been alarmed. The common people all hid in their homes with their doors and windows tightly shut. Those who lived closer were scared out of their wits by the deafening battle cries. The common people did not know what was going on. The only thing they were certain of was that the capital, which had been peaceful for less than 5 years, was once again in chaos. There was war again. Last time, when Pang Xiao led soldiers to attack the capital of Biji, he did not allow the Tiger Army to disturb the common people. The people of Biji had originally been on tenterhooks. This time, no one knew who was fighting who. No one could be sure whether there would be a riot in the city. Chaos. Even the imperial palace was being attacked. If there were criminals in the city who took the opportunity to burn, kill, and loot, their crimes would be easily covered up. The warden's office, which was responsible for maintaining law and order, was now the main force attacking the imperial palace. The common people hid and trembled, silently praying that kind of tragedy would not happen. Prince Li editor, Modlaws 123. Prince Li was no less fearful than the common people in the city. He did not expect that so many people could not take down the imperial palace. Beloved officials, follow us to kill the enemy. Li Chitian's voice was full of confidence. After saying this, he quickly walked down the red stairs. Ji Zhayu followed closely behind Li Chitian. Pang Xiao supported Qin Yining from time to time and walked behind them. The officials looked at each other in dismay. Everyone was very worried, but Your Majesty had spoken first and was walking at the front. The officials naturally did not dare to show too much fear in front of Your Majesty, lest they become an excuse for their political enemies to attack them. As a result, the civil and military officials were united like never before. They all glared angrily and planned to follow Li Chitian to see what the situation was like. They walked all the way to the city walls near the imperial palace gates. They heard the angry roars close by and saw the imperial palace gates being hit by solid logs from the outside. The soldiers guarding the imperial palace used their bodies to stare at the gates from the inside. The dust that fell from the imperial palace covered their heads and faces, but no one had the time to pay attention to it. Some of the more timid people's legs began to tremble. Li Chitian said with a strong sense of righteousness, "My beloved officials, follow me to the city gate tower to see what is going on." Pang Xiao and Ji Zhayu looked at each other and immediately stepped forward to stop him. They tried to persuade him, "Your Majesty, it is too dangerous to go up the city gate tower. What if a stray arrow gets hurt?" Li Chitian, however, waved his sleeve in a righteous manner, "No matter. I want to see who dares to rebel." As he spoke, he turned around and walked up the steps. When the officials saw Li Chitian's righteous indignation, their hearts were filled with pride. For a moment, everyone disregarded their own lives and followed Li Chitian up the city walls. Qin Yining's movements were a bit slower. He was half supported and half carried up by Pang Xiao. On the high walls, the layout of the buildings in the capital could be seen very clearly. There was not a single person on the streets. It seemed like the capital had become a ghost town like the border. And the people attacking the city walls were the people from the 5 cities warden's office. Li Chitian's face was filled with shock and sorrow. It's actually the people from the 5 cities warden's office? That is Prince Li. I didn't expect him to lead my people to attack the imperial palace. Could it be that he really wants to rebel? Chapter 638. Your Majesty, be careful. Pang Xiao stretched out his long arm and caught the arrow before Li Chitian could react. The force of the rotating arrow was enormous. Pang Xiao's palm was cut and bleeding, but he did not relax. His powerful arm strength caused the arrow to stop 3 inches away from Li Chitian's nose. Li Chitian was so scared that he let out a long sigh. The guards holding leather shields rushed forward and quickly formed a human wall in front of Li Chitian, blocking the second wave of arrows. Pang Xiao threw away the arrow and turned to protect Qin Yining behind him. Although the situation here was chaotic, Pang Xiao was confident that he could protect Qin Yining as long as he was in front of him. Seeing the soldiers guarding the city walls and the soldiers of the 5 cities warden's office brazenly attacking below the city walls, Pang Xiao's heart bled. Pang Xiao had been on the battlefield for many years and had always loved his soldiers as if they were his children. In this struggle for power, Li Chitian felt that taking back the imperial palace would be as easy as blowing off dust. However, Pang Xiao felt sorry for these innocent soldiers who had died in vain. They were all citizens of Daju. They were all good people. But because of the struggle for power, they had lost their lives for no reason. If they had fought with the Tatan to protect the mountains and rivers, then their deaths would have been worth it. But what about now? They had lost their lives for no reason. They could not be called heroes. They might even be labeled as traitors. They were wronged. How innocent. Just like Pang Xiao, Jizuyu's expression was extremely ugly. When he saw Li Chitian's angry and high-spirited face, he felt a wave of disgust in his heart. Li Chitian's life had been saved by Pang Xiao. Although it was frightening but not dangerous, he calmed down and thought about it. They had once fought alongside Pang Xiao and Jizuyu. He wasn't an ordinary scholarly emperor. He was the founding emperor of the Daju dynasty. An emperor on horseback actually needed someone to save him. In front of so many people, if he behaved even more cowardly, wouldn't he lose the limelight? With this in mind, Li Chitian strode forward and pushed aside the shield-wielding guards in front of him, exposing himself to everyone below the palace walls. As soon as they saw Li Chitian come out, more arrows came flying from Prince Li's position. Li Chitian used all his strength to dodge 2 of the arrows and then reached out to grab another one. The skin on his palm was scratched, and the pain made his face unsightly. But he couldn't stop. Even if it hurt, he had to endure it. Flustered and exasperated, Li Chitian threw the arrow down the palace wall. He took a deep breath and roared, "My officers and soldiers, what are you doing? Do you want to rebel?" Li Chitian was dressed in bright yellow. Standing on top of the palace wall, his figure was very conspicuous. Coupled with his furious roar, the soldiers of the warden's office were all stunned. Wasn't this the emperor? The emperor was rescued. Then why did Prince Li still want to attack the city? They fought in order to capture the Tartar spies and protect the imperial family and take back the imperial palace. But now the person they wanted to protect was standing in front of them. The emperor they were loyal to was on the palace wall. The soldiers were at a loss for a moment. Everyone lost their will to fight. Some people even threw their weapons to the ground. Prince Li's eyes were about to pop out. He had already come this far, and there was no turning back. If he couldn't kill Li Chitian this time and take back the palace, what awaited him was Li Chitian's crazy revenge. Prince Li roared, "What are you waiting for? That is a fake. He is a Tatan spy. Kill him, take back the palace, and save the Empress Dowager, the Empress, and the unborn dragon son. This is the right thing to do. Everyone, don't be fooled by this fake." Prince Li was far away from Li Chitian. Li Chitian couldn't hear his words completely, but he could roughly guess what Prince Li was shouting. Li Chitian was so angry that his heart hurt. But he was the emperor. In front of people, he had to act like an emperor, especially in front of so many soldiers. At this time, he couldn't act like a shrew. He could only shout, "Look carefully, who am I? If you continue to be stubborn, you can only be convicted of rebellion." The soldiers of the warden's office looked left and right. They didn't know who to believe. Seeing that the people below had stopped attacking, the guards on the wall all let out a sigh of relief. Li Chitian had an idea. Just as he was about to open his mouth to mobilize them, he suddenly saw a black sea in the distance neatly approaching along the wide street. The sound of the footsteps was uniform. They came from afar, and the red tassels on their black armor and helmets fluttered in the wind indicated their identity. It was the Tiger Army, and from the sound of the footsteps, the earth seemed to tremble. The people standing on high ground could see the Tiger Army coming in a steady stream. Clearly, there were more than 10,000 Tiger Army soldiers entering the city. "It's Marquis Qingyang." Pang Xiao's eyes were red with anger. He gritted his teeth and said this. He had single-handedly brought up the Tiger Army. It could be said that the soldiers inside were all his brothers. And Marquis Qingyang actually dared to drag these people in. When Prince Li saw the Tiger Army arrive, he immediately let out a sigh of relief. The Tiger Army's fighting strength was extremely valiant. The border army's individual combat ability was not something the greenhouse flowers of the warden's office could compare to. Now that the border army's tiger army had arrived outside the palace gates, they were like wild beasts about to leave their cages. In the blink of an eye, they were about to devour people. Marquis Qingyang loudly said, "Everyone, taking back the palace today and protecting the Empress Dowager and the Dragon's Son is a great merit. Don't listen to the clever words of those Taytan spies. Listen to my orders, charge." Yes. The uniform roar shook the palace walls. It came from the mouths of nearly 10,000 people. It was extremely shocking to the people who heard it. And looking from above, one could see the orderly and strict formation of the tiger army even more clearly. This was the difference between the spirit of the soldiers and the ordinary soldiers of the warden's office. It was simply the difference between heavenly soldiers and the soldiers of the warden's office. A soldier's duty was to obey orders. With Marquis Qingyang's military order, the various troops of the tiger army moved forward in an orderly manner, joining the ranks of the warden's office to attack the palace. Li Qitian panicked. He knew how strong the tiger army led by Pang Xiao was. If those little tiger-like soldiers rushed up, how could they survive? Li Qitian couldn't care about anything else. He leaned half of his body out and loudly said, "All of you stop. If you go any further east, you will be rebelling." When Marquis Qingyang heard this, he also loudly said, "Don't listen to him. The people above are Taytan spies. Listen to my orders." With the addition of the tiger army, they were about to attack the palace gates. Pang Xiao and Ji Zheyu tacitly moved forward side by side, standing at the outermost perimeter of the palace walls. Pang Xiao looked down and saw a familiar man with his sharp eyes. He loudly reprimanded, "Sun Tianyu, what are you doing?" Chapter 639. Your Highness. Sun Tianyu rubbed his eyes in disbelief. He widened his eyes and looked up at the person on the palace wall. A tall figure, a handsome face, slightly narrowed phoenix eyes, a cold gaze under anger, and an intimidating aura around him. It really was Wang Yi. Didn't Marquis Qingyang say that the palace was controlled by Taytan spies? Didn't Prince Li just shout that Your Majesty was a fake? That was fucking bullshit. Even if His Majesty was impersonated, how could he not recognize the person who had been at the forefront of every battle when they had followed him into battle? When attacking Dian, he was almost cut down by Prince Ning. It was Wang Yi who saved him at the risk of being cut in the back. Even if there was only one person's back in the crowd, as long as he saw this person, he would definitely recognize him. Therefore, Prince Li and Marquis Qingyang clearly lied to them and used them to rebel. Although Sun Tianyu was a rough man, he wasn't stupid. How could he not understand at this time? At this time, Sun Tianyu didn't care about the reactions of the people around him. He looked at the yellow figure again and knelt on the ground. The centurion beside him saw this and said angrily, "Sun Tianyu, are you crazy? Get up. Are you waiting to be trampled to death?" Sun Tianyu pointed up. "Look who is up there." The centurion raised his head and saw the imposing Pang Xiao as well as Ji Zheyu, who was as beautiful as the sun. The centurion was also stunned. He went through the same mental journey as Sun Tianyu and knelt down next to Sun Tianyu. "Your Majesty, we came late to save you. Please forgive us, Your Majesty." It was like a drop of water falling into a pot of hot oil. With Sun Tianyu and the centurion as the center, ripples spread out around them. As long as the brave tiger army raised their heads and saw Pang Xiao and Ji Zheyu, none of them could continue fighting. Everyone knelt down and realized that the brave tiger army had been used. The tiger army's people were like this. The people of the 5 cities warden's office were also shaken. Unlike the rough men of the tiger army and the border army, those who could hold a position in the warden's office of the 5 cities did not have any background. Perhaps their families' grandfathers and uncles were still inside the palace walls they were attacking. In an instant, the pressure on the defenders decreased because the attackers were shaken. Their attacks were not as fierce as before. When Marquis Qingyang saw this situation, he was so anxious that he saw stars and his body went soft. If he didn't grit his teeth and force himself to sit upright on the horse and not lose face in front of so many soldiers, he would have run away without a trace. No, he couldn't continue like this. Otherwise, wouldn't he and Prince Li fall into Li Chitian's hands together? Would he still be alive then? All of you, attack. Don't be deceived by liars. They're all liars in disguise. They're all Taytan spies. Quickly attack. Marquis Qingyang anxiously jumped off his horse and waved his horsewhip to hit the men of the Tiger Army. He was so angry that smoke came out of his head, especially when he saw those kneeling on the ground. When he received the imperial decree to take over the Tiger Army, he immediately replaced the high-ranking officers with his trusted aides. On the other hand, he didn't have the time to pay attention to the centurions below him. Marquis Qingyang wasn't interested in thinking about it. What he didn't know was that the Tiger Army had already experienced the incident of Ji Zheyu being placed under house arrest during the impeachment of Pang Xiao. The former high-ranking Pang Xiao's trusted aides had already been replaced with Li Chitian's. Only those who didn't hold high positions were spared from the disaster. And these people just happened to be the ones who had fought with Pang Xiao the longest. Perhaps they didn't have high positions, but their rallying power in the army was stronger than those high-ranking officials. Their loyalty to Pang Xiao was also the deepest. Marquis Qingyang was madly throwing a tantrum as he whipped the Tiger Army soldiers who had submitted. This action of his really made Pang Xiao's sword-like eyebrows stand up. He had to consider the health of his soldiers even when they were training. He would rather take a blade than have them lose their lives. Who the hell did Zhu Deong think he was, to actually dare to whip them? Zhu Deong, fuck. Your ancestor. What are you doing? Pang Xiao picked up a scabbard and fiercely threw it down the high wall. Marquis Qingyang only heard a wong sound by his ears. That scabbard smashed into his left shoulder before he could dodge. Ah! Marquis Qingyang screamed as he fell to the ground. The bones in his shoulder seemed to have cracked, the pain causing his vision to darken. As for Pang Xiao's valiant curse, even though he had cursed the Empress Dowager's ancestors, making it hard to avoid being caught, it also made the Tiger Army even more certain that Pang Xiao wasn't a spy in disguise. This familiar curse, this familiar domineeringness, even cursing the Empress Dowager's ancestors in such a valiant manner, who else could it be other than their former commander-in-chief war god Wang Yi? The Tiger Army gradually spread the news through their ears. Gradually, even those Tiger Army soldiers who hadn't yet made it to the square in front of the palace gates and were still congested in the alleys learned of this. Their black tide-like footsteps all slowed down. Li Chitian saw that Pang Xiao's shout had this kind of effect. Even when he was standing on the wall in his yellow robes, his performance might not have been as shocking as Pang Xiao's shout. How could Li Chitian's heart not ache? However, now wasn't the time to bicker over these things. Li Chitian turned his head to look towards those old officials who hadn't supported the rebels from the start. How could those old officials have the mood to think about anything else? They saw that there were members of their own clan in the warden's office, and there were even some of their own clan members who had been injured in the process of attacking the imperial palace, and some had even lost their lives. The old officials' eyes were about to split open, and quite a few of them began to yell out the names of their own clan members. As a result, even the people of the warden's office began to waver. Pang Xiao immediately gave Ji Zheyu a look. Although he had prestige in the army, he hadn't been the commander-in-chief of the Tiger Army for a long time. Ji Zheyu was the previous commander-in-chief of the Tiger Army, but he had been taken down by the Empress Dowager's words. It was more appropriate for him to speak out now. As a result, Ji Zheyu stepped forward and loudly said, "Officers and soldiers of the Tiger Army, hear my order. Arrest all those who intend to attack the imperial palace." Many of the Tiger Army's lower-level officers nearby all acknowledged this order. As for those new officers who had been replaced by Marquis Qingyang's own people, they found it very difficult to convince the masses. Prince Li's expression was as ghastly as a ghost's. If they failed this time, they would undoubtedly die. He drew his sword and ordered his trusted aides, "Charge." At a time like this, it was time to fight to the death. Otherwise, all that awaited them was death. The subordinates who had followed Prince Li in his uprising had no choice but to follow in his footsteps. As for those who had followed Marquis Qingyang in the Tiger Army, they had also made up their minds to resist. They immediately began to clash head-on with the Tiger Army that had followed Ji Ziyu's orders. Everyone had weapons in their hands, and the place was very crowded. As soon as the two sides came into contact, there was immediately blood. Many people didn't have time to act before being stabbed in the back. In front of the Imperial Palace gates, the Tiger Army and the Warden's office clashed with Prince Li's men on a large scale. Chapter 640. At this time, Qin Yining was even somewhat disgusted with himself for coming up with the idea. Helping Li Chitian take back the throne was indeed the most beneficial choice for the people of Daeju and Pang Xiao. Perhaps in the eyes of those who had been on the battlefield for a long time, the casualties in front of the palace gates were not many. But how innocent were these sacrifices? They were also people who were born and raised by their parents, who had flesh and blood, and who had feelings. This kind of sacrifice was not grand at all, and even made people feel sullen. Pang Xiao suppressed the emotions in her heart, turned around, and hugged Qin Yining as she retreated a few steps. Bringing her away from the edge, she could no longer see the bloody scene below. Qin Yining said sadly, "Let's end this quickly. There is no benefit in delaying. It's chaotic here, and the people are also suffering." Pang Xiao nodded, "You're right." Below the palace walls, the two rooms were in contact with each other. The casualties caused by the fighting made Li Chitian feel uneasy, especially when Commandery Prince Li, who was leading a group of people, gradually approached them. Li Chitian couldn't suppress his anger and shouted, "Li Guangzhen, why haven't you stopped yet? Zhen is here, do you really want to rebel?" Li Chitian directly called Prince Li's name, causing Prince Li's bodyguards to turn around to look. Not only these people, but even the Warden's office of the 5 cities and the Tiger Army slowed down their movements. They were suspicious of Commandery Prince Li. This was the capital. Besides Your Majesty, Pang Xiao, and Ji Ziyu standing on the palace walls, there were other court officials. Prince Li and Marquis Qingyang insisted at the beginning that the palace was attacked by Taytan spies, and everyone believed it, and rushed over for the sake of the imperial family they were loyal to. But now, Your Majesty was in disguise. Could it be that Prince Zhongshiren, Marquis Dingbei, and the other court officials were all in disguise? That lie could no longer fool them now. Commandery Prince Li gradually slowed down his horse and finally stopped because of exhaustion. The situation was already hopeless. If they continued to resist, they would only be killed immediately. If the 3,000 battalions, the 5 battalions, and the Divine Strategy Battalion were alerted and rushed over, his corpse would probably be trampled into meat paste. Thinking of this, Prince Li's whole body quivered, and he suddenly came to his senses. "I can't take it anymore." He couldn't go on like this. If he continued to be stubborn, there would really be no room for negotiation. Prince Li jumped off his horse. Because his movements were too hasty, he almost rolled and crawled to the ground. Ignoring the pain, he frantically kowtowed and shouted, "Your Majesty, is it really you?" I thought you. I heard that there were bandits and Taytan spies in the palace, so I came here with the soldiers to save the Empress Dowager, the Empress, and the others. I didn't expect you to come back. It's really a flood against the Dragon King's temple. Following Prince Li's words, the tens of thousands of people gathered in the square in front of the Imperial Palace became so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. All the fighting stopped. The air was filled with the thick smell of blood, and the miserable cries of the seriously injured could occasionally be heard. Prince Li's voice, which was almost broken in his nervousness, made everyone feel speechless. Shameless. Was there anyone more shameless than Prince Li? Everyone knew what was going on today. Prince Li acted like a good person, but what about the brothers from the 5 cities warden's office who had lost their lives because of him? Prince Li's actions not only didn't improve his image in the slightest, but also made everyone despise and hate him even more. The silence only lasted for a breath of time. Seeing that the situation had stabilized, Li Chitian suddenly let out a long sigh of relief. Today's great battle could finally come to an end. Enough. Li Chitian loudly ordered the people around him, "Open the palace gates." "Your Majesty." An old official immediately stood up and saluted, "Your Majesty, this matter is inappropriate. What if the rebel army below rushes in?" Daju's imperial palace was renovated from the foundation of Biji's imperial palace. It occupied a large area both inside and outside, and the buildings were also grand and imposing. It was easy to defend and difficult to attack. Today's guards were able to stabilize the situation and prevent the rascals from rushing in by relying on their current advantage. But if the palace gates were opened, wouldn't that be letting in a hungry tiger? Li Chitian gazed at the soldiers below the city walls and raised his sleeves, loudly declaring, "We believe in our soldiers. Today, they are the same as Prince Li and Marquis Qingyang. They all came to protect the imperial palace and capture the spies. Everyone is loyal, and we are very moved. You don't need to be long-winded. Open the palace gates and welcome the 5 cities warden's office and the Tiger Army soldiers present to enter the palace." When the officials heard this, a few of them came to their senses. There were also those who were slower to react who continued to persuade him. Qin Yining and Pang Xiao looked at each other and saw the understanding in each other's eyes. Li Chitian's move was truly clever. Opening the palace gates and welcoming these soldiers into the palace was just to find a spacious place for them to wait for orders. However, this act of trust had the greatest effect of calming their fearful hearts. If Li Chitian showed the slightest intention of investigating today's rebel army, these innocent soldiers might start a mutiny in order to save their lives. If the Tiger Army and the 5 cities warden's office joined forces to attack the imperial palace, would the imperial palace be able to defend itself with only Pang Xiao and Jiziu's trusted aides? When the time came, Li Chitian would probably die a horrible death. Thus, Li Chitian wanted to stabilize the situation and pacify these people so that they wouldn't mutiny. In Qin Yining's opinion, if Li Chitian was smart enough, today's matter couldn't be held accountable. Regardless of whether it was Prince Li and Marquis Qingyang, or the soldiers below. Not only could they not be held accountable, they had to be rewarded based on their contributions. As for Prince Li and Marquis Qingyang, as long as Li Chitian sat firmly on the throne, he could deal with these minions whenever he wanted. Sure enough, as Qin Yining had analyzed, seeing Li Chitian's actions, everyone let out a sigh of relief. Even after the palace gates were opened, the 5 cities warden's office and the Tiger Army first lined up neatly under the leadership of their respective officers before entering the palace, quietly standing in place. Just like before, Marquis Qingyang and Prince Li returned to Fengtian Palace to attend court with the other officials. Qin Yining hesitated whether or not he should continue to follow. However, Li Chitian smiled and said, "Younger sister-in-law, don't think too much, just come with me." He then looked at Qin Yining's tired expression. "The court will end soon, are you all right?" Such courteous treatment caused all the officials who heard and saw to raise their eyebrows. Qin Yining smiled and said, "Many thanks for your Majesty's understanding, this subject's wife is fine." For a woman to be able to attend court was already a great favor. If she made all sorts of excuses, then she didn't know how to appreciate favors. Li Chitian returned to Fengtian Palace, still sitting upright on the steps. Pang Xiao led Qin Yining and Ji Ziyu to the original position where they should have stood for court. Chapter 641. Li Chitian sat with his back ramrod straight. He forced himself to suppress his emotions so that his complacency would not be too obvious. However, the uncontrollable smile on his face still revealed his true feelings. Life was truly full of ups and downs, full of surprises. When Li Chitian was trapped in the underground palace and had to rely on corpses to survive, he never thought that he would be able to sit in this position again. When he had to beg for food by Pang Xiao's side and rely on an enemy who had already shed all pretense of cordiality to protect him from the dark underground palace, Li Chitian never thought that the person who would help him regain his position would be Pang Xiao. The people who helped him make the decision were actually Qin Huayuan, who had been removed from his position in a fit of anger, and Qin Yining, who had almost been abandoned by him. In any case, He was now sitting firmly in this position again. Li Chitian pursed his lips and chuckled silently. Then he said, "Today's matter was indeed caused by Tatan's spies who had infiltrated the palace with the intention of taking advantage of the situation to harm the imperial family. Now that we were able to safely escape danger, all of you have contributed greatly." Li Chitian's words caused everyone to respond in unison, "Your Majesty's declaration, this humble subject is terrified." At the beginning of Li Chitian's court session today, no matter who it was, the 20% who had hurriedly knelt down and shouted, "Long live your Majesty." Seeing that Prince Li had been completely defeated and fearing that they would be punished by Li Chitian, how could they not seize this opportunity to show their loyalty? Immediately, someone stepped out of the ranks and saluted, saying in a clear voice, "Reporting to your Majesty, Prince Li gathered troops and horses to attack the palace." Moreover, when he assumed power, he already had the intention to do so. He has repeatedly urged his subjects to support him as the emperor. He truly has the ambition of a wolf. You. Prince Li was furious. He turned around and angrily glared at the upright official. Without waiting for Prince Li to refute, several other officials stepped out of the ranks and righteously said, "Lu Daren's words are correct." Prince Li misused his power and acted alone. For the sake of his own selfish desires, he disregarded human life and the power of the emperor. He truly deserves to be punished. The voices of the officials were full of confidence and sonorous power. They described Prince Li's crimes as 10 times worse than what everyone had seen. Prince Li's body trembled with anger. Yesterday, the people who had bitten him were like dogs that were fawning over him. When something happened, these people only cared about clearing their names in the blink of an eye. This reality was within his expectations. Commandery Prince Li sneered and felt disheartened for a moment. Forget it, the winner takes all. Since he had already come this far, what else could he say? Dogs biting each other. This scene made Li Chitian feel helpless. He could only rely on others to regain the power he wanted. He vented all of his negative emotions. After admiring these people's faces enough, Li Chitian still didn't forget his business. "We naturally understand your intentions." Once these words were said, the people impeaching Prince Li felt joy appear on their faces. As long as your Majesty was willing to accept their advice, they would still have a chance to live in the future. Prince Li's head drooped. He looked like he was waiting for death. Who would have thought that Li Chitian would change the topic and say, "However, we understand today's matter. It was just a misunderstanding." Prince Li was trying to save the Empress Dowager and Empress. He was loyal. "As for my beloved officials, you were wholeheartedly loyal to us. None of you did anything wrong." Li Chitian tried to smooth things over, but both sides were stunned. Qin Yining stood next to Pang Xiao. She couldn't help but look to the side to see the reactions of the officials behind her. She believed that a Chen, who was present, only needed to think a little to understand. Li Chitian wouldn't punish anyone at this time. Just like when Li Chitian had the palace gates open outside the palace walls. He didn't just want to appease the people in front of him. More importantly, he wanted to appease the soldiers standing in line inside the palace. If Prince Li was convicted today, wouldn't the soldiers outside become Prince Li's accomplices? If a mutiny occurred, Li Chitian wouldn't be able to control it. Therefore, regardless of whether Prince Li's actions were true or false, and regardless of what Prince Li did to seize the palace, Li Chitian wouldn't punish him right now. Sure enough, Li Chitian continued, "Now that the Tatan spies have been eliminated, our heart aches the most for the soldiers who died this time. Our decision is that the soldiers who died in battle today will all be posthumously promoted by 3 ranks. The soldiers who survived will be promoted by 1 rank. This matter will be handled by the Ministry of Personnel at their discretion." "As you command." The Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Personnel stood out and saluted. "Your Majesty is wise." The officials saluted. Li Chitian then looked at Prince Li and said with a smile, "Prince Li and Marquis Qingyang have rendered meritorious service by saving your Majesty today. Prince Li will be conferred the title of Prince Li and Marquis Qingyang will be conferred the title of Duke of Qinghua." The conferring ceremony will be handled by the Ministry of Rites. This official receives the decree. The people from the Ministry of Rites also stood out to respond. Prince Li and Marquis Qingyang felt like they had been hit by a meat pie that fell from the sky. Their hearts were filled with surprise and joy. Unexpectedly, not only were they not dragged out to be beheaded at this time, they were actually promoted to nobility. Although they didn't know whether Li Qitian was angry or not, the current situation made their hearts feel extremely calm. Li Qitian turned and said, Prince Zhongshuren, Pang Xiao, and Marquis Dingbei, Ji Zayu, have rendered meritorious service by saving your majesty this time. Each of them will be rewarded with 100 taels of gold and 10 bolts of silk. Following this, Li Qitian gave out rewards to the people who had performed outstandingly in seizing the palace. However, Qin Yining wasn't happy at all when he heard this. Li Qitian had just conferred rewards to the soldiers who had participated in today's battle. Those who died would be promoted by 3 ranks. Those who survived would be promoted by 1 rank. It must be known that the majority of the soldiers who had surrounded the imperial palace today were Pang Xiao and Ji Ziyu's private soldiers. If these people accepted these rewards, it would be the same as eating a salary from the imperial court. They would no longer be Pang Xiao and Ji Ziyu's private people. Li Qitian was truly sinister. At this time, he still didn't forget to deal with Pang Xiao and Ji Ziyu. In Qin Yining's heart, Li Qitian's originally not lofty image had already fallen to the bottom. Unfortunately, in the current situation, Li Qitian's survival was the most beneficial to the imperial court, the common people, and Pang Xiao. They could only pinch their noses and endure. With Li Qitian's rewards, this rebellion and seizing the palace was quickly resolved. The decisiveness with which it was handled was surprising. No one was at fault. The ones at fault were the Taitan spies. However, no one present was stupid enough to ask Li Qitian where the Taitan spies were. Li Qitian nodded in satisfaction. He turned and said in a loud voice, Today, we have another matter to announce to all of you. We have ordered the former Minister of Rites, Old Qin, to rest at home for some time. With the turmoil in the imperial court, many officials have died. The imperial court is in dire need of people. We can only trouble Old Qin to return to the court and appoint Old Qin as Genji Hall's Grand Scholar, Xiong Jinshui. This servant is here. Grand Eunuch Xiong Jinshui bowed. Li Qitian said, Immediately pass on our decree. Invite Old Qin to the court to discuss state affairs. In addition, prepare lunch for the officials and the soldiers waiting outside. As you command. Xiong Jinshui hurriedly went to carry out the orders. With so many people needing to eat, the imperial kitchen would not be able to keep up. They could only mobilize all of the kitchens in the palace. While waiting for Qin Huayuan to return to the court, everyone was given a bowl of porridge, 2 pieces of flatbread, and a small piece of pickled vegetables. As for the soldiers waiting outside, it was even easier. Everyone was given 2 hot steamed buns the size of their faces and cold water pipes. Seeing that Your Majesty not only allowed them to wait in the palace, but also provided them with food and drink when it was time to eat, the soldiers were finally able to put down their fears. At this time, Qin Yining had also eaten lunch with Pang Xiao. He went to the bathroom to tidy up. The palace was not a place where they could talk without worry. As a result, the 2 of them did not discuss Li Qitian's reinstatement of Qin Huayuan into the cabinet. They even had some doubts in their hearts. Li Qitian's sudden actions, could it be that Qin Huayuan's own operation was involved? However, no matter what, Qin Yining was still happy that his father could be used again and find his own position. His father had been an official for half of his life. When the surrendered officials of the Yang dynasty were not willing to take him with them, it was already a blow to him. Now, he had calmed down and recognized reality. He believed that his father would be able to find a new position when he returned to the court. Are you tired? A deep voice sounded by her ear, accompanied by warm breathing. It brought Qin Yining out of her thoughts. It's okay. I'm fine. Qin Yining looked up at Pang Xiao and smiled at him. Pang Xiao hugged Qin Yining's shoulder and bent down to touch her stomach. He frowned and said, You're already tired from last night. This morning, You didn't sleep for long before you came to court. You also stood for so long. This won't do. You don't have to go to court later. I'll go find a place. It's more important for you to rest. No matter how good your body is, it's not suitable for you to stand for so long. Qin Yining was a bit hesitant. On one hand, she wanted to know what Li Chitian was planning to do after Qin Huayuan was invited back. On the other hand, Qin Yining was indeed very tired. Now, both her feet and calves were swollen. They were like two wooden clubs. Every step she took felt very heavy. When Pang Xiao saw this, he decided to help her. Be good. Rest well. I'll tell you everything later. Are you afraid that I'll hide it from you? Seeing Pang Xiao's frown, Qin Yining knew that he was worried. She could only nod and say, okay. Pang Xiao nodded and said, I'll ask for an edict later. Bing Tang and Ji Yun will be by your side. I'll go to court later. Now that Pang Xiao was in front of Li Chitian, it was naturally easier for him to talk. Soon, Qin Yining was arranged to rest in a side hall. Other than Bing Tang and Ji Yun, Li Chitian also arranged for palace servants to wait on her outside. Qin Yining washed up and went to sleep on the soft couch, leaning against a large pillow and clothes. Even though she was asleep, she didn't sleep well. Her mind was in a mess because of the current tense situation. When she woke up again, she felt that she was in a familiar embrace. Both of them were slightly jolted by the swaying of the carriage. Chapter 642. Qin Yining opened her eyes and saw the low ceiling of the carriage and a yellow oil lamp the size of a bean. Pang Xiao's handsome face was clearly outlined by the orange light. His gentle voice was right beside her ear. How did you sleep? Not bad. Why did I sleep for so long? What time is it now? Qin Yining's stomach made it impossible for her to lie flat. At this moment, she was using Pang Xiao as a pillow and nestled in his arms. Pang Xiao smiled and said, You slept for the entire afternoon. After the court was dismissed, I directly took you out of the palace. How do you feel? I'm fine. I didn't expect to sleep for so long. Qin Yining found a comfortable position on Pang Xiao's shoulder and rubbed her face against his clothes. Her voice was lazy and soft. Why are we only going back now? The court session lasted until night time? Yes. Your Majesty wanted to appease his father-in-law and discussed the Tayton issue in the court session. They had already made a decision. Who knew that there would be an accident midway and we would receive new news from the south? Pang Xiao paused and ran his hand through her hair apologetically. He said helplessly, Sister Yi, I'm afraid I've implicated you again. There's no need to prepare a delivery room for our new home. I'm going to the old capital of the Yang dynasty to take office. Your Majesty has ordered you to accompany me. We'll set off in 3 days. Qin Yining's eyes widened in shock. She supported his arm and sat up. What happened in the south? Did something happen to the county king of Yang? What happened in the court session? Tell me in detail. Pang Xiao nodded and pulled Qin Yining back into his arms. He smiled and said, Don't worry. I was going to tell you anyway. 4 hours ago. At the court session in Fengtian Palace. Qin Huayuan was dressed in a civil official's first-rank imperial robe. He kowtowed in front of the palace. This official, Qin Meng, thanks your Majesty for his kindness. For your Majesty to think highly of me, I will repay you with my loyalty. Dear Minister Qin, please rise. Li Chitian smiled and slightly bowed as he raised his hand. Qin Huayuan stood up and naturally stood at the head of the civil officials. Li Chitian then made some adjustments to the positions of the officials in the imperial court. This time, quite a few important officials had lost their lives in the underground palace, leaving many positions empty. As a result, the structure of the court officials was undergoing a major adjustment. After a series of adjustments, Li Chitian said, In this turmoil, the imperial court has lost many capable officials. It is truly heart-wrenching. The Tayton from the north had invaded Heaven's Gate, and the Dragon Legion Corps was defending. If they lost, it would only take a few days for the Tayton to step into Jingdo. The south isn't peaceful either. Ever since the Yuchi Yang fled to the south, Yongning House, Hangzhou House, and Jianyang House declared independence. Along with South Yang's Yuchi Shujie, they wanted to support the Yuchi Yang to regain the throne. However, I also received reliable news that Yongning House and Hangzhou House did not succeed immediately. They were all suppressed by the local soldiers. However, the people of South Yang rebelled and charged into the government and cruelly killed the local officials that I sent. Only then did the three houses become part of South Yang. At this point, Li Chitian helplessly let out a long sigh and said, "Right now, the war situation in the north is tense, and the situation in the south is like this. The country is already in danger. If any of you have any ideas or countermeasures, you can all share them now. Everyone, let's work together to overcome this crisis." Li Chitian's words were really sincere, and he did not put on the airs of an emperor. He looked at the people below the imperial court in anticipation. Some of the officials frowned in deep thought, while others discussed in low voices. However, a moment later, someone stood up. Reporting to His Majesty, although the situation in the south seems lukewarm, and Yuchi Yang's ability is not as valiant as Yujin Khan's, at first glance, the situation in the south does not seem to be as tense as the situation in the north. However, it is this tepid encroachment that is the most terrifying. Official Wang is right. South Yang is slowly chasing after them and gradually encouraging the people. I'm afraid that it will cause unpredictable consequences. After all, Daeju has just recovered the Yang dynasty, and the people there do not have a strong sense of belonging to Daeju. The south was originally the territory of the Yang dynasty, and the people there all felt that they were part of the Yang dynasty. However, the Yang dynasty had already been destroyed, and the Yuchi Yang had already handed over their documents, so the people had no choice but to lower their heads and live. However, if the Yuchi Yang were to move in the south, a single spark would start a prairie fire, and it was very likely that the people in the south would be encouraged to side with the Yang dynasty again. When that time came, it would be even more difficult for Daeju to take back its authority. The south must be stable. Our Daeju's base is in the north, and the south is the most important place to produce grain. If a rebellion occurs in the south, I'm afraid that the grain will return to its previous state. Exactly. Our Daeju has strong soldiers and strong horses, but what we lack is money and grain. If the first two are not enough, even a fierce tiger will not have the strength to fight. The officials' discussion grew louder and louder. It was clear that everyone was aware of the current crisis. Daeju already did not have enough money and grain to deal with the Taitan, and it was very difficult. If the chaotic south was added to the mix, they would probably be attacked from both front and back. Moreover, it had only been 5 years since Daeju overthrew the tyranny of BG. In these 5 years, the country had been in constant chaos. The people had no time to rest and recuperate. Instead, they lived under the shadow of war every day. If this went on, they would definitely lose the hearts of the people. Otherwise, the commoners would be exhausted from running around. Everyone knew this, but to solve the problem, it was not something that could be done in a short period of time. Li Chitian sat on the throne and listened to the officials' discussion. His heart was also quite heavy. He did not sleep at all last night, and he had experienced a soul-stirring battle to seize the palace. He was already exhausted. The officials in the hall were unable to come to a conclusion, which made Li Chitian feel even more irritated. However, as an emperor, he had to maintain his proper demeanor, especially in front of Prince Li, who wanted to seize power. He could not perform worse than this kind of traitor. Li Chitian looked at Qin Huayuan, who had been silent all this time. "Beloved official Qin, what do you think?" Qin Huayuan, who had been called, stepped forward and bowed. "Replying to your majesty, this official believes that the chaos in the capital and the rebellions in the north and south were premeditated. The Taitan and the southern Yang must have secretly contacted each other." When Qin Huayuan spoke, the discussion quieted down. Everyone knew that he was known as the wise Pan En, and they all wanted to hear a definite solution from Qin Huayuan. Li Chitian also stood up and stood on the throne with his hands behind his back. Beloved official Qin's words are reasonable. What countermeasures does beloved official Qin have? Replying to Your Majesty, this official believes that for today's plan, we need to prioritize and attack them one by one. If we deal with both sides, although our Daju has brave and valiant generals, we fear that we do not have enough provisions. If the battle line is too long, it will not be good for our dynasty. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.